Chapter 171, Destruction. Once I saw the card magic system as an option listed in this game, I couldn't help but somewhat give up on my ideas of winning. Not because it made me less confident in my chances, but because I felt the urge to experience what the card magic would be like once it reached a level usable in the games. More to the point, I felt like Udona's testing may not have been completely accurate. The idea of the values that she explained to me originally made sense at first. Until I began to think about it more deeply. After all, that would mean that only 2 second-tier cards could be combined before it became third-tier. And what about third-tier cards? Each one would make it jump several levels. No, I felt like there was something else about how the values worked instead of simply adding them on during the fusion. So, I added the card law and card magic options to my character, which brought my attention to another feature of this little game. At the side of the screen was a slowly filling vertical bar. Below the bar were the 2 words, power level, meaning that this was probably a rough measuring of overall power. It hadn't reacted at all when I gave myself the ability to use ki, mana, and chakra, but had shot up slightly when I added in the card powers. Still, everything added together was less than 5% of the power level meter. Which brought me to the next window. Now that I had assigned the systems that I wanted to use, I had to adjust the attributes of my body. There were various buttons to increase my strength, speed, and everything else. Since I planned to use the 1,000 arms, 10,000 threads in this fight, I increased my mana and ki. I wasn't sure how much exactly I was giving myself, but by the time I was done the power meter was at 50%. Going back to the previous window, I gave myself a ki path that specialized in defense, that way my more frail physical body wouldn't be too much of a weakness. Finally, I went to my inventory window. Here, I could choose whatever weapons, armor, or artifacts I wanted to take with me. As I had expected, this also included magic cards once I gave myself that system. And it was here that I found out where the root of Udona's misunderstanding came from. From what I understood, Udona had been working with the first-tier fusion cards, and may have even expected that was all there was. However, in the list of cards I saw, the fusion cards went all the way to rank 7. Rather than the spell cards themselves having a limit, the fusion cards should have a limit to how much they can fuse. With the window pulled up, I checked how much time I had left, still over 5 standard minutes before the preparation phase of round 1 began, so 10 minutes total. I began grabbing various magic cards, combining them into different spells. Some I discarded when I saw the finished product, and others I chose to keep. Each one raised the power level by a small margin, until finally the bar had been filled. Strangely enough, I found that only 4th-tier spells had a significant impact on the power bar. Each one alone increased it by between 5 and 10%, while 3rd-tier spells barely made a dent. I guess that means that normal keepers will generally have a lot of 3rd-tier powers available to them, and just a few 4th-tier. This game was actually giving me a surprising amount of insight as to what I could expect from the future Keeper games. Between this and the Keeper's Cards game, I actually felt like I might have an idea of what I was doing, for the first time in a long time. Shaking my head, I went over the items that I had granted myself. Only one was an actual weapon, though it had been enchanted through the card magic as well. I still had a few minutes left, but I felt fairly satisfied with the arrangements that I had made so far. Looking across from me, I saw that my opponent was still looking through the system, seeming to be having trouble deciding what he wanted to use. Seeing that, I gave a small sigh of relief, feeling like my chances for the first round were improving. After all, if I was up against someone else who didn't know what they were doing, then at least it wouldn't be so bad. Like that, the minutes passed by while I waited for the tournament to begin. Thankfully, the character I had set up wasn't wiped when the preparation phase started, so I did not have to go through and make it all over again. Instead, once the final countdown finished, I felt a familiar light encompass my body. The sensation was similar to what happened when I descended, so I was not too worried. And surely enough, once I opened my eyes the landscape had changed. I was no longer in a large room filled with keepers, and had instead moved to a large mountain, standing just before the snowy peaks. The chill invaded my body, yet caused me no harm. In the corner of my vision, I saw a timer counting down from 100 seconds, no doubt the time until the fight began. Since I had some time, I looked over the items in my belongings. My outfit had not changed after coming in here, still being the same t-shirt and jeans I typically wore in the admin room. The only thing different was a small black box that had been attached to my waist. This was the container for my various cards, which I quickly pulled out. Something I had realized when I was going through the spell cards to prepare myself was a critical weakness of this magic system. Unlike a magic system that relied only on the user's understanding, this one required you to find the card you wanted to use each time you cast a spell. This added several unnecessary seconds to the casting process. Thankfully, I wasn't the only one who noticed it. The weapon that I chose to grant myself for this fight was an item designed to overcome this weakness. It took me only a moment to find the right card in the deck, which quickly expanded to reveal a silver gun. The barrel of the gun was smooth, having a rectangular shape with a thin slot to fire from. Where one would load a magazine, there was instead an opening to insert cards. One by one, I began placing the spell cards that I had brought with me into the gun, at which point I would be able to mentally call out which spell I wanted to trigger. By the time I was done, the countdown was almost over, so I let out a long sigh, raising the gun up towards the sky. The instant the last second ticked away, I pulled the trigger. Detect lifeforms. A green light shot out from the gun and into the sky, before spreading out in a wave in all directions. I wasn't sure how the previous two fighters had managed to find each other so quickly. But it was likely that everyone selected some kind of detection ability. Mine was a radar-like spell that could cover a massive area. Since there were only 2 living creatures in this world, it would make it easy to find him. And sure enough, only a few moments later I felt a mental ping from the spell, showing me the location of my opponent. Closing my eyes, I began to spread out my chakra threads, preparing for the coming battle. It was now that I noticed my mana and ki levels, both of which were far higher than normal. So this is what it will feel like. I shook my head to clear away the distraction, before firing off the gun again. Step through space. This time, the light that exploded out from the gun only moved a short distance before stopping, turning and covering my body. A moment later and I was high in the air above the other keeper, who suddenly turned to face me from below. Judging by his body, he had not modified his appearance as well. Though, I did not know what abilities he would have, so I wanted to play this safe. Before giving him a chance to release one of his attacks, I aimed the gun at him and poured a massive amount of mana into it. Meteor Call. A yellow and red portal appeared in front of the gun, which then grew further and further until it seemed to cover the world beneath me. This was my most powerful spell that I had prepared, one that by itself had taken 10% of the power allotment. From the portal, a giant flaming rock descended upon the world, crashing into it and causing a shockwave to spread out. Fire and ash filled my vision once the portal disappeared, rocks spreading across the horizon. I cast my detection spell again, and abruptly turned towards my side, raising my left arm up reflexively. The gray-skinned keeper must have teleported or something, because he was now in the air next to me, lashing out with a powerful kick. Even with my ki focused on defense, I felt something crack inside my arm, pain shooting through me. Physical combat type. I mentally assessed what he had to have chosen based on what he showed. Even as my body was sent flying away, thankfully I had defended with my free arm, or I might have lost my only weapon. Spreading my ki out around me, I used it as a curtain to catch the air, slowing myself down and eventually allowing me to stop. Already, the other keeper was charging at me again, giving me just enough time to activate another of my spells before he arrived. Intangibility. A soft blue glow appeared on the body of the gun just as the keeper appeared in front of me again. When his fist, clad in the yellow glow of ki, slammed into my chest, it quickly passed through me. The sudden unexpected change sent the keeper off balance long enough for me to lift my gun and trigger the second attacking spell. In total, I had prepared 3 attack spells. The first was the meteor spell, for wide area destruction that could level a small country with ease. The second was specialized for dealing with supernatural defenses, turning them against their user. This was the third one. A pure, focused destruction on a single target. Annihilate. From the barrel of the gun, mere inches from the other keeper's face, a sickly green energy shot out. When it made contact with his head, the light in his eyes faded. A black spot formed at the point of contact, quickly spreading across his body. As it spread, he seemed to burn away, his body breaking apart into bits of ash that fell to the ground one after another. Once the last speck of ash was blown away, the blue light surrounded my body once again, returning me to the stage. Across from me, the gray-skinned keeper looked completely dumbfounded, as if he never understood how he lost like that even until the final moment. What was that gun? He asked, clearly figuring out that the gun I used played the largest part in my victory. Card law with card magic. I told him the basic systems needed for the gun. The gun was the mage pistol. Glancing around, I saw that only a few of the other fights had ended by now, with most still ongoing. That wasn't a surprise at all, seeing that I had managed to end mine rather quickly. Leowyn, are you alright? I couldn't help but ask inwardly, part of me still concerned. I'm fine, Father, she answered from within my spiritual realm. What happened? I saw you preparing to fight, and then it was over. You weren't able to watch what happened during the fight itself? That part surprised me slightly. I had expected her to just be sealed away in my spiritual realm, unable to interfere. Instead, it seemed like she had just been locked out entirely. No, I wasn't. Was it interesting? I could feel the curiosity in her tone as she asked that, as she had never seen me fighting with my full power before. A soft chuckle escaped my lips while I shook my head. I'll give my character spiritual energy next time, so you should be able to watch, at least. If that didn't work, I'd have to try to find some other way to get Leowyn to watch the fights. Looking around, I saw the various projections above the stages, showcasing each of the fights. Through most, I saw melee combatants, but there were a few that had gone for a more magic approach like myself. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that the melee combatants could shatter a mountain with their strikes, because I saw someone do just that. On the other hand, the magic users had powerful spells. At one of the fights, I saw that the two people hadn't actually met yet. Both of them likely chose a magic type, and were simply sitting in a meditative position at their starting point. Just as I began to wonder what they were up to, one of them abruptly opened their eyes and slammed their hand onto the ground. The projection zoomed out to show the entire world that the two were fighting on, where a visible ripple could be seen flowing through it. The farther it moved, the larger it became. And when it arrived at the other keeper on the far side, the planet itself exploded. Is that what a 5th-tier attack spell looks like? I asked myself in amazement. The only way that I could imagine that working was if they tried to cheat the system. Instead of using 3rd and 4th-tier powers, they got a 5th-tier planet-busting attack spell. Given how long the two of them waited to build up their power for it, it took well more than half of their power total just for that one spell. Of course, a strategy like that wasn't a viable one in the long run. After all, I had already finished my fight by the time he launched his attack. If I found either of them before their attack was ready, the fight would be over before they had the chance to move. Chapter 172, Playing Dirty. For my second fight, I was rather surprised to see that I had been paired up with another of the new keepers. Things had become a bit more random now, as some of the other new ones that remained were being paired with veterans. Though, more importantly, the new keeper I was paired up with was the same one that had used the world-busting strategy in the previous fight. He did not appear to spend much time adjusting his character, which likely meant that he intended to use the same strategy a second time. Shaking my head, I calmly waited for the preparation period to pass. This match was the easiest I could hope for, as I won simply by teleporting to his position and dropping a meteor on him. And this time, I had been the first to finish my match, as I had been put against an opponent who didn't really deserve to be in the second round in the first place. So, I simply took the chance to watch and wait for the others to finish so that the third round could begin. On the bright side, this gave me time to observe the various fighting styles that were being used by the different competitors. Most of the melee fighters appeared to be focusing on ki, with a few utilizing divine energy, mana, or other energies that I couldn't identify. There was one that struck me as interesting, a keeper whose body was bathed in a rainbow-like glow. I found it rather hard to identify what effects the energy had, because it seemed to be too versatile, launching spells or enhancing his body as needed. Probably a higher-level combination energy, I thought inwardly as the other keepers began to end their matches one by one. When the last of the fights had concluded, the companion stepped forward, a small smile on her face. All right, everyone, in the winner's circle, we have 9 combatants left. Since the fights are pairs of 2, that means we will be seeding 1 competitor each for a round. Each time, the one to get a free pass will be the one who completed their round the fastest. Her voice echoed out through the room, drawing in the attention of the other keepers. Slowly, she turned her head to look at me. For this round, that will be Earth Force 1, as he finished his fight in 48 seconds. I gave a slow nod of my head as I heard that, though most people were probably rather surprised to hear the number. If they knew who my opponent was, things would have been different. But at least like this, I was able to get a pass into the quarterfinal round. While everyone else was busy preparing for their next fights, I stepped down from the stage to watch them again. With just 4 matches in this round, I would be able to better observe my future opponents. This was a rather clear advantage for me, but at the same time, I wouldn't be able to skip the next round as well. Out of the 8 other keepers, there was only one that I could identify as being part of a new group. From his performance, he was a combat expert fully focusing on ki. I was able to see a number of abilities from him that I had never witnessed monks using before. Whenever he moved his body, a golden glow would form around him, taking a variety of shapes to attack or defend. Sometimes, he would create a sword of energy in his hand to thrust at the enemy, and other times he would shake his shoulders to reveal a golden shield to defend himself. Even the final attack he used in the battle was shocking, though not one that was completely new to me. For his last attack, he brought his hands together, creating a golden ball of ki between them. With his fingers spread out and curved like fangs, he thrust his hands forward. As he did, the golden ball washed over his hands before pushing forward as well. However, the shape it took when it pushed forward was different. The originally sphere-shaped golden light changed into the form of a giant dragon's head, its mouth opened wide. By now, his opponent was weakened and weary from the fight, and could do little to prevent the jaws of the dragon from closing on him. And like that, he advanced to the next round as well. I couldn't help but be shaken as I saw that. And it wasn't just me. Inside of my spiritual realm, Leowin was similarly shaken. That attack that he had used was incredibly similar to the last attack that Leowin used before she died, though it seemed more advanced. "Father, are you going to fight him as well?" "Maybe," I gave a slow nod. That keeper wasn't the first of his round to finish, so he wouldn't advance directly to the semifinals. That meant that there was a 1 in 3 chance that he would be my opponent. Looking at the back of my hand, I saw that the number 8 had changed into a 1, indicating that I needed to move towards the first stage. Once I was there, I saw that my opponent wasn't the keeper specializing in ki. Rather, it was Mean Green, the same green-skinned keeper that had been killed in the demonstration. "You're one of the new guys, right?" he asked in a gruff voice, looking across the stage at me. When I gave a small nod, he grinned broadly. "Did pretty good to make it this far. Though this is where you'll be ending. I think, maybe you can do good in the losers tournament and get another shot." It was unclear whether he was trying to offer helpful advice, or just taunting, given his gravelly voice. I simply selected the same character that I had been using previously, while adding in spiritual energy so that Leowin could potentially watch. I hadn't done so for the second round because, well, it didn't seem like the fight would be very interesting for her to watch. This time, once we entered the fight, I did not bother firing off my detection spell to find Mean Green. I had seen previously that he already had a detection ability and would be coming to find me soon. So instead, I prepared to set the valley where I spawned as the battlefield. Trap, binding chains, trap, soul drain, trap, null key, trap, teleport circle. One by one, I began firing a series of prepared spells at the ground, taking the time when Mean Green was tracking me down to set a nice little surprise for him. Only once I had finished preparing did I take a deep breath. Firing off my detection magic into the air, the land around me was a vast valley, with mountains on one side and an ocean on the other. According to the spell, Mean Green was coming from the direction of the ocean, and would be at me within moments. As I looked out at the horizon, I could faintly see a golden glow rapidly charging towards me. Yet, I did not lift my gun to fire at him. None of my 3 prepared spells were suitable for a situation like this, so I waited for him to enter the area of my traps. However, as the green figure bathed in a golden glow landed on the plains, he abruptly stopped just outside of the trap area. You were waiting for me?" he asked with a tone of surprise. Glancing down at the ground, he seemed to sense the presence of the traps. "You know those things only work if I step on them, right?" "I know," I said, smiling calmly. Now, I did raise my gun. So I'll have to make you step on them. Force teleport. When I pulled the trigger of my silver pistol, a white light shot out. However, Mean Green didn't even pay any mind to it, simply stepping out of the way before it could hit him. Really? Don't tell me that this is how you won your fights before. He spoke, a somewhat sad tone in his voice. I simply shrugged my shoulders, still keeping that calm smile. Seeing that, Mean Green sighed, shaking his head. I saw the light around his body focusing on his palms, and knew that he was about to destroy all of the traps that I set. Yet, that was the moment I had been waiting for. With a small step, I appeared directly in front of Mean Green, my gun already charged for a second blast and pressed right against his body. This time, when the white light shot out, he could only jump backwards, trying in vain to dodge until it caught up with him. When the white light surrounded his body, he let out a shout and suddenly vanished, appearing behind me in the traps I had placed beforehand. Silver chains shot up from the ground, digging into his skin. Black fog lifted up, burrowing into his legs. Even the golden light of his key dimmed as it was sucked into the ground. This is dirty," he muttered with a grimace, struggling to move his arms. I could see the veins bulging out, his muscles trembling. "You know this won't kill me." As he spoke through gritted teeth, I could feel a powerful energy welling up within him, and I could only nod. "I know, but it keeps you still." I had to chuckle as I said that, lifting my gun up to aim at him again. This time, I fired off the final attack spell of my arsenal. Dissonance. From the description of this spell that the system provided, its accuracy was the worst, simply because the spell's effects even targeted itself. But at this range, against an unmoving target, it was perfect. A spiraling pair of black lights shot out from the pistol, clashing against itself before burrowing into Mean Green's body. Mean Green's body buckled over, falling to the ground as he coughed up blood. The energy that he had been building up was suddenly running out of control inside his body. And without a way to control his energy, he popped. His body burst apart at the seams, blood and bone exploding outwards in a cloud of gore. Like that, I had successfully finished the quarterfinals round of the tournament, and was honestly surprised with myself. Maybe it was thanks to having time to understand that card magic system, as well as the support of the mage pistol, but I had not originally expected to be able to advance this far. What was more surprising was that I had been the first of the two fights to finish. Meaning that I had a free ticket to the finals. Ultimately, this meant I was guaranteed to win at least 500 points, even if I lost both of the upcoming matches. 500 points, plus learning more about how the card magic system worked made this tournament completely worth it. When I got back to the tournament room, I saw that the losers bracket was still going strong. Those that had lost already had mostly left, while those that remained were simply enjoying the show. Across from me, Mean Green had a somewhat unresigned look on his face, but ultimately did not question his loss. In my defense, it was his fault for talking so much. Unfortunately, the keeper I had an eye on before did not make it through the quarterfinals, and was eliminated by the other one who had been in the demonstration, Miss Terry. The red-skinned keeper gave a polite bow towards his opponent, before moving on to the next battle. When he saw that Mean Green was moving towards the losers' tournament, he seemed surprised, and sent an odd glance my way. I smiled politely towards him, giving a brief nod before moving to watch his fight. His opponent was a keeper that I had never seen before this tournament, a human-looking one with dark skin. Both had chosen to be melee fighters this time, but ultimately Miss Terry pulled out another win, advancing towards the finals. However, unlike what I expected, we did not jump straight into our last match right away. Rather, once Mystery's battle was over, the companion hosting the tournament signaled for us to wait. Only when the current round from the losers' tournament ended did she make her announcement. "Alright, everyone, the finalists for the winner's circle have been decided. We have our reigning champion, Miss Terry, and on the other corner, the newcomer Earth Force 1. Everyone get ready for their fight, once the losers bracket has caught up. After all, the winner from that side will still have a shot at the championship." She grinned mischievously as she said that, much to the dismay of the crowd. Well, at least we have time to rest? Chapter 173, Crushing. Even though I could guarantee myself a prize at this point, I couldn't slack off. If I managed to get second place, or even the championship, my prize would increase drastically. However, at this point there were no new keepers left. And even among the losers bracket, I could see the veterans showing their explosive strength. Battles were not lasting as long now, everyone pulling out all that they had to end their matches with a single decisive strike. They all knew that one more loss meant that they would lose any shot at winning this tournament. And although these meetings often held multiple tournaments for the same game, they would have to fight through an entirely new tournament for that prize, whereas this felt so close by comparison. One by one, I got to see the powers that a keeper could display in the games. Magic, cultivation, there was even one keeper that chose to mix it up by going for a pure technology build in one fight. Though, he seemed unfamiliar with wielding the weapon that he had chosen and was eliminated thanks to that. To my surprise, it was actually Mean Green that emerged as the final victor of the loser's bracket. He was able to quickly triumph over all of his adversaries using the same physical fighting style that he had displayed before. And once he had earned his spot as the final loser, as the hosting companion called it, he sent a fierce glance in my direction. "All right, everyone, the moment you guys have been waiting for. Our two undefeated fighters, Earth Force 1, Miss Terry, please approach the first stage," she called out in a booming tone, while myself and the red-skinned keeper moved up for our fight. As expected, neither of us adjusted our avatars for this battle. We had come all this way through the use of a single fighting style, and we wanted to see it through. Though for me, I was busy trying to come up with a surefire plan to defeat Miss Terry. Once the countdown had ended and we were sent into the world, I found myself standing alone on a tiny island. One step in any direction enough to send me to the water. Quickly, I loaded my magic cards into the magazine for my gun and waited for the battle to start. The moment it did, I did not begin laying traps again, but rather fired off my detection spell. I doubted that I would be able to use traps to win a second time so easily. Ignoring the fact that Mean Green might have warned him about how I defeated him in our battle, just the battle itself made me lose confidence in that tactic. After all, Mean Green had been able to sense my traps, and the only reason he fell for them at all was because he spent too much time talking. As soon as my detection spell showed me where Miss Terry was, I fired off my teleport spell to take me roughly a mile behind him. Forcing him to change his course would buy me a little bit of time, and until then I began shooting myself. Enhance, Speed, Enhance, Strength, Aegis. 3 buff spells that would boost my physical ability. After casting those spells, I brought the mage pistol into my left hand. It wouldn't play a big role in this fight, but I couldn't just turn it into a card either. Logically, doing so would cause the several cards stored inside of it to scatter, and there was still the off chance that I would need them later. By the time that I finished casting my buffs, I could already see Ms. Terry on the horizon. However, he did not charge over, merely standing in midair. His one eye stared directly at me from far away, his 4 hands in front of his chest forming a diamond shape. In the center of the diamond, a glowing sphere of golden light could be seen. Reflexively, I began spreading out my chakra threads, ready to dodge at a moment's notice. From observing the fights of the key specialist keeper, I could guess that this was the preparation for a big technique. And sure enough, I was not disappointed. Several moments later, Miss Terry clapped his 4 hands together over the golden light, causing it to wash over his arms. Then, he began to move his arms back in a strange, slow rhythm, leaving golden after images. When he was done, he no longer had just his 4 arms, but another 40 behind him. Yet, this was still not the end. He did not charge over towards me and overwhelm me with his fighting power. Instead, all 44 arms moved to place their hands in front of him, forming a 4-layered circle of palms. This time, I could feel the ripples of ki spreading out all the way to my position, and my hand clenched on the pistol. This wasn't any special power of a system. If I was right, this should be a technique that he knew how to perform from his own training. Suddenly, all 44 palms flipped upside down, and the world around me seemed to shatter. Black cracks spread out through the air, originating from his position like a spider's web. The grassy land that I was standing on shook and broke apart, several pieces rising into the air, falling into the cracks. The ki he was emitting was all around me now, and I could feel it. In a desperate move, I began stepping through my chakra threads, fleeing as far as I could to the side. If this was a directed technique, then moving back or forward would amount to nothing, so only the side was a possible escape route. Thankfully, my chakra threads allowed me to slip between the cracked space, but I never felt myself escaping the field of ki that Miss Terry emitted. Glancing over towards him, I saw him still facing me with a serious expression, his arms all still facing me. As I watched, his palms turned inwards, and all clapped together, collapsing into just his original 4 hands. For a single moment, I felt a pressure on my body unlike anything I had ever known before. I could feel my bones cracking, shattering under the force. But before I could even cry out, it was already over. I was back at the stage, bent over and gripping the console, feeling a cold sweat on my back. Playing over the scene again, I knew that there was nothing in my arsenal that could have changed that outcome. If I moved to engage in close combat, just the sheer number of arms would have overwhelmed me with an assault from all angles. None of my defensive spells even held a candle to that attack. Alright, what an outcome. Mystery's signature technique, shatter the earth and collapse the sky, folks. I haven't seen that one used in years. The companion called out loudly, breaking me from my thoughts. I made a mental note to look through the market later to see if I could find that technique. I had seen its power firsthand, so I knew just how terrifying it was. Next up, Earth Force 1 has to defend second place against Mean Green. Fighters, to stage 1. Thankfully, I didn't have to move from my spot. Are you alright, Father? Leowen asked with concern from within my spiritual realm. That was, I know, I sent back to her with a brief nod. A technique like that shouldn't be within the realm of a first-rank keeper. However, he had not broken the rules. The amount of ki that he had was within the limits. It's just that he knew a technique that went beyond those limits. Likely, if he was able to use his full power, he would not have required a charge-up period in order to release it. The seconds ticked by, and once again I was sent into an isolated world. This time, I was at the edge of a deep canyon which stretched on to the horizon. Once I was done loading my gun, I prepared to fire off the detection spell again. The trap tactic was definitely not going to work on the same person twice, so I could only prepare for a frontal confrontation again. However, once my detection spell launched, I was surprised to find that there was no response from it. Even after giving the spell enough time to wash over the entire world, it did not detect another living creature. Shishti, he's using a stealth technique. Without the ability to search for my opponent, I simply began buffing myself again, waiting for them to come to me. If this battle would be at a time of his choosing, then the least that I could do is prepare myself for it. Of course, I had to hope that they weren't simply going to use a planet-busting spell to end the fight while I couldn't sense them. Thankfully, nearly 5 minutes later I saw Mean Green walking through the air in the horizon. The golden glow that he held before in our previous fights were gone. Instead, I felt an intense surge of mana whenever I looked at him. Oh great, he's not just a physical fighter. Just like Miss Terry, he stopped just above the horizon, staring at me with his hands behind his back. I could barely see him opening his mouth when I enhanced my eyes with ki to watch him, yet his voice rang out in my ears. Sorry, Earth Force 1, but let this be a lesson. Little tricks and traps aren't meant to take you all the way here. It ruins the fun for the other participants. And if there's no fun to be had in a fight, rather than speaking, he brought one hand out from behind his back and lifted it up to his chest, his palm facing upwards. A small orb of light formed in his palm, an intricate mix of countless strange symbols. When Mean Green opened his mouth again, his voice once more echoed. But this time, it seemed to speak from the world itself, rather than directly to me. My life is the core of the world. My heart shaped the past. My hand molds the present. My mind begets the future. This world has fallen to chaos and must be restored. With every word, the mana pulsing from the sphere of light grew stronger. This wasn't elemental magic. I could not feel any disturbance in the flow of natural energy, so why? Did he have another system that boosted his mana through chanting? Feeling a sense of danger, I immediately began rushing towards him as fast as I could, hoping to get there in time to stop him from unleashing this spell. Within my eyes that see all, return the world to its original state. Let all things become new, and all beginnings end. Final cleansing. When he finished his last line, the ball in his hand slowly dropped, moving towards the ground. Yet, it was still too far away for me to reach before it hit the ground. The moment that the orb representing the spell hit the ground, a field of white began to spread out in all directions. Within the field, all things lost their shapes and colors, as if they were simply erased. With how close I was to the blast, I barely had enough time to fire off a single spell. I hastily cast my teleport, wanting to move to the far side of the planet. However, in doing so, I felt a similar pressure crushing my body as when I fought Miss Terry. In my attempts to get as far away from the blast as possible, I forgot one of the rules of this tournament. The fighting area shrank over time. None of my fights had ever lasted this long, so I miscalculated the size of the world. And that's that, folks. Earth Force 1 loses to a ring out. I heard the companion's voice before I even noticed that we were back in the administration room. I glanced up, seeing Mean Green politely nod at me before stepping down from the stage, the companion's voice ringing out once again. This means that Earth Force 1 will be leaving with the third-place prize of 500 points. Let's hear a round of applause for this new competitor. To my surprise, there was actually a brief round of applause from the people still gathered in the room. However, what surprised me more was that the companion then began walking over to me. "You can stick around to watch the rest of the fights," she said, holding a hand out. "But rules prohibit people from playing the game again after they win a prize. Can't just have 3 people dominating the tournament again and again to farm points, right?" I glanced down towards her hand, where there seemed to be a familiar blue glow. The typical light that the system shined. Giving a small nod, I took her hand in mine, guessing that this was how they transferred the prize points. Even if I didn't accept the prize money to fight again, I doubted I'd be able to get as far a second time. Alcahest's system companion Ilaria wishes to transfer 500 points. Authorizing with host keeper, transaction approved. Alcahest has transferred 500 points to your account balance. Chapter 174, an old game, a new player. I didn't bother to stick around to watch the final round between Mean Green and Miss Terry. At this point, there wasn't a lot for me to gain from watching fight anymore. I had already experienced firsthand the level of power that a first-rank keeper was expected to have, and then some. I'd have to ask Grimmer, but those two were likely at a significantly higher rank than that, and just participating in this tournament for fun. Instead, I went back out into the hall. It was hard to tell whether the fighting tournament was considered long or short compared to most games, but it was definitely shorter than the Keeper Sim game that I played before. After all, that one was a round-robin style tournament, with each match taking nearly an hour. Naturally, it would take longer than a tournament with a bracket system, and each round taking a total of no more than half an hour. So I started looking through the door titles again. By now, there were far less people in the halls, giving me more room to examine each game taking place. In total, there were 20 doors along each wall, with one door at the very end, for a total of 41 different games. If I thought about how many points the Gilded Branch spent every month on these meetings, the number is simply astronomical. Thankfully, there was one familiar face out in the hall. Grimmer himself stood at the entry point, watching over everyone that was walking between the doors. When he caught my gaze on him, he offered a friendly wave. I had some questions to ask, so I walked over to greet him. "Saw that you got a prize already. Aronia, she should be in charge of the fighting competition, yeah? Good job there." He greeted me with a smile and a nod as I approached. "Thanks. Why aren't you in any of the games, though?" I couldn't help but ask, glancing back towards the doors. Grimmer put on a bitter expression as he heard that, shaking his head. "One of our rules. The host of the meeting can't participate in any of the competitions. It'd make it look rigged if we won." Makes sense. Mind if I take some time to ask you a few questions that have been bothering me lately?" When he heard that, he gave a brief, polite nod. As such, I didn't hesitate. "What sort of benefits does being in a guild offer? I know you invited me to yours, and another group did the same for my first meeting. But nobody has really explained that bit to me yet." He seemed surprised when he heard my first question, glancing at my curious. "You never asked that cat-eared companion of yours? She probably could have told you." I gave a small sigh at his response, shaking my head. The question hadn't really occurred to me until we got here, after all. Well, it's pretty simple really. Guilds are another system that the keepers themselves added into the overall foundation of the bigger governing system. Like with the standard time or the keeper titles, enough keepers petitioned for it that we were allowed to form groups within the system. As he explained, Grimmer crossed his arms in front of himself, leaning against the nearby wall to his side. There are only really two benefits to joining a guild. First, and perhaps most importantly, members of the same guild will never be matched up against one another in a fight. Though, this has its limits. For instance, when we discovered that, we tried to get as many people into one guild as we could to end the games entirely. Wanna guess what happened? When he saw me shrugging my shoulders helplessly, he continued with a small chuckle. The system made it so that everyone in the guild was matched against someone else within the guild for the next several months. Far as we can tell, there is a guild member cap of 10% for every keeper rank. So we can only have 10% of the first, second, and so on before the system gets mad. I nodded at that. It was still a huge benefit to not be forced to fight your friends, even if there was that limit. And the other benefit? Grimmer shook his head, closing his eyes for a moment. The second one isn't so special. We are able to exchange points with other guild members without directly visiting their administration room, or vice versa. That's how we host these meetings, shifting our points around every month to make sure that the host can afford it. We even have a few keepers who have made it their sole purpose to farm for points by mass-producing worlds and stopping them a few years before they get to the games. They just have to send off the points before the system matches them up with the next invasion. I couldn't help but raise my eyebrow as I heard that. Doesn't that seem a bit like cheating? I mean, by that logic you could just transfer a ton of points to your guildmate after they've been paired with an opponent, and they use those points to enhance their world enough to overwhelm the enemy. Grimmer laughed lightly at that, shaking his head. Yeah, some people try to exploit it like that, and every now and then, it works. But it also backfires, just like the other benefit. After all, in order to raise their strength enough to dominate their opponent like that in a short time, they would have to buy extremely powerful systems or worlds. And those would permanently increase their keeper rating, making it so that they would always be set up against more powerful keepers unless they completely reset and start from scratch. Saying that, Grimmer simply shrugged his shoulders. Once that was found out, people stopped trying to take advantage of it. Though, we still do every now and then with our Avenger branch. Seeing my curious expression, Grimmer continued his explanation. That's what we call the ones that are specialized for that. We build them up from scratch, and wait until they are paired with one of the more monstrous keepers. Then we funnel as many points into them as we can afford so that they can rapidly raise the strength of their world. After they send in their troops, they reset their worlds to start over from scratch. I found myself feeling a bit of pity for those Avenger branch members. Resetting their worlds over and over meant that they had to live through the more boring parts of the keeper process repeatedly. Given the Gilded Branch's philosophy, I doubted they would simply fast forward through the entire process. I see, that's terrifying in a number of ways. Though, it does make me want to join up with a guild sooner or later. If only for the first benefit. Are there any other restrictions on guilds that I should know about? Grimmer seemed to give it a moment of thought, before shaking his head again. Not really. You can leave or join guilds as often as you like. You just aren't allowed to be in more than one guild at a time. Well, that was a relief. The fact that being in a guild didn't restrict my freedom helped. Thanks. One last thing. Is there a trading platform aside from the market? For instance, if I wanted to sell a system I invented directly to another keeper, I could give it to them at a discount, but still ultimately make more than the normal royalties? Hearing that, Grimmer actually let out a loud, roaring laugh. Huh, everyone ends up wanting something like that sooner or later. Believe me, Dale, we tried. We petitioned for it like we did everything else, but the system wouldn't budge. At one point, we had over 6,000 names on the petition, a full 2/3 of the entire system. But there wasn't any change. How do those petitions work? I couldn't help asking that, since he kept mentioning them. It didn't seem like anything too important, but every bit of information could be useful eventually. However, Grimmer only gave a light shrug, shaking his head. It's nothing special. Someone just makes a forum post to petition for something, and people could respond to vote for it. Every now and then, something manages to go through. I think that's what gives so many people hope that there is a true keeper, and that he is the one reviewing everything to see what to approve. So either a true keeper, or just an extremely intelligent system. My head shook from side to side as I thought about that. I glanced up towards Grimmer and offered a small smile. Thanks for the tips. I should get back to the games, though. Still got a long ways to go to hit my goal. Grimmer nodded his head, staring down at me. Well, the offer's still open if you want to join the guild. I chuckled, but didn't say anything. While the idea of joining a guild was more appealing now, I would have to make sure that I chose carefully. After all, if I joined the gilded branch and just used their points to elevate myself to the games, it might turn into a situation where I become indebted to them. I would rather not have something like that happen. I gave Grimmer a small wave as I turned around, once again looking for the next game that I would compete in. This time, I actually made my way towards the Keeper Sim room. Now that I had learned a bit more about the games held here, I felt ready to tackle this game. The fact that I had actually won points already surely made me more confident as well. When I entered the Keeper Sim room, I was not surprised to see that a tournament was already well underway. Going by the scoreboard projected on the far wall, there were 6 matches in out of 20, showing that it was less than half over. However, I was a bit surprised when I saw the name Earth Force 1 listed on the scoreboard. Misbehave, 6 wins. Allegor, 6 wins. Earth Force 1, 6 wins. Titan, 5 wins. Sentinel 7, 5 wins. Naturally, this meant that Bihena was taking part in this tournament. More to the point, she was actually tied for first place. Though, that wasn't saying much since there were still so many matches left to go. Just that those 3 had yet to suffer a loss. Earth Force 1? A voice spoke up from behind me, catching me by surprise. Behind me, I saw a man in a black suit, his skin a solid white and his eyes black. When I nodded my head, he turned to look towards one of the stages. In order to prevent cheating, you aren't allowed to directly observe your companion competing. However, I can send you to a special viewing area where you can watch her match without the risk of intervening. Hearing that, I couldn't help but hesitate. If Bihena did get a prize from this tournament, then sticking around wouldn't serve much purpose. I couldn't even be a proper cheering squad. After all, there was likely a similar rule as with the other tournament, and we wouldn't be able to play the same game after winning once. However, I ultimately ended up nodding. If Bihena didn't win, then we could tackle the tournament again and I'd be here from the start. That, and I really didn't know what other games that I could feasibly play and didn't want to go looking for another one right after I settled on the Keeper Sim. Seeing me agree to the offer, the white-skinned man nodded his head. My vision was briefly obscured with a fog of black before I found myself standing alone in a small room. There was a single chair in it along one of the 4 stone walls, while opposite to that was a large display. The scene displayed was clearly a Keeper Sim match, going by my memory, but there was also a second screen contained within it. The second screen focused on Bihena, letting me see her expressions and reactions. And hear the different commands that she gave out. Giving a small nod, I moved to sit at the chair, propping my chin on my hands as I watched her play. Chapter 175, Kill It with Fire. Bihena was calm as she watched a battle unfolding on the stage before her. As the goddess of battle herself, she had seen this scene too many times to count. People praying to her for victory on both sides of the field. Yet, she could offer support to neither, for doing so would always leave the other side with nothing. In every match so far, she had chosen the same race, the pure and simple humans that she had watched grow for thousands of years. They were her children, in every way that mattered to her, and she was the most familiar with their abilities. In every match, she would suggest that they use one of the other game modes to compete, but every time her opponent asked for battle mode. Yet, as soon as the match started, her focus immediately flared up, and she showed the dignity of the goddess of battle. Her first move was to create a scout to identify the enemy's base and locations. She researched vision-enhancing technology such as the telescope, and sent him out alone. Although her scout had eventually perished, he provided valuable intelligence. And in a match such as this, that made his sacrifice not in vain. Bihena's opponent was using a race of 6 armed giants, positioned far to the north of her current location. Each one stood at least 15 meters tall, which was more than enough for her to understand how to fight them. A being that big would require a lot of resources to produce a single unit. They'll fall behind in terms of technology or magic advancement in order to produce a significant number of troops and attempt to rush me. This was what was going through her mind as she made preparations. Bihena spread her forces out, occupying multiple satellite bases to aid in her production and confuse her enemy. She placed siege weapons on every base's walls, so that whenever a scout arrived, their ballistae could pierce through the giant's thick skin. Although she would sacrifice the location of a smaller base, her main fort was secured. And once the first base was discovered, her plan went in motion. Bihina laid an ambush along the one path wide enough for the giants to traverse between the discovered base and her opponents. Lining it with explosives, and placing ballistic units in advantageous positions around the path, it was just a matter of waiting. Soon, she saw the giants walking through, clad only in leather hides and wielding trees as clubs. A calm smile formed on her face as she gave the order to detonate the explosives. An eruption of smoke and flame filled the stage as the giants had their legs blown out from under them, before being peppered with the giant bolts of the ballistae from above. Immediately afterwards, Bihina pulled her ambush units back to defend the base, in case there was a secondary attack being launched from a more difficult path. Thankfully, no such attack was inbound, judging by the look of frustration she saw on her opponent's face. Bihina did a quick calculation, and judged that she might be able to win the battle if she put in a full charge now, but chose to wait instead. There was still the chance that her enemy was hiding forces inside their base, and she needed to make sure that the battle was finished in a single move. So she continued to defend, letting her opponent misidentify the base that they had located to be her primary base. Meanwhile, her technology continued to advance. From ballistae to cannons, from cannons to tanks. It took her nearly a half hour to finish advancing her technology, and in that time her satellite base had to defend 2 more attacks before finally being taken. The look of joy on her opponent's face when he thought that he had won, only to turn to shock at the realization that he had been tricked, caused her to laugh. And then, she began her offensive. Armored tanks rolled along the ground, while planes filled the air. The fists of the giants could not crush the tanks, and their thrown rocks could not strike the agile planes. From both land and sky, attacks came that decimated the forces of the giants, quickly advancing on their last home. While artillery shells peppered the wooden walls of the base, a look of resignation appeared on her opponent, the final clue that assured her victory. As long as there was not a second base established, there could be nothing to stop her. And sure enough, the notice of her victory rang out soon after, bringing her score up to 7 wins with no losses. Not good enough, she thought to herself as she waited to be matched with her next opponent. She had also received the notice that points had been transferred to their balance, which meant that Dale had already won a game somewhere, or at least placed high enough to earn a reward. Her next opponent made her blink, before a groan escaped her lips. Kathy, the girl who had dragged Bihina to this tournament in the first place. Also known as Sentinel-7, one of the leading players in the game so far with only 1 loss. Bihina, she called out with that same happy smile, her legs chittering as they tapped against the ground rapidly. Hello, Kathy? Bihina responded in a tired tone. Kathy reminded her too much of Orvi back home, but did not carry the same cuteness that made the personality work as well for her. At least, not in Bihina's eyes. She could only see Kathy as a hyperactive woman who had likely not seen a true war up close. She said that her first match in the games would be starting soon. I wonder if I'll ever see her again after that. To Bihina, someone like Kathy would never survive on a real battlefield. They weren't patient enough to observe the finer details, and would let their emotions cloud their judgment too easily. Still, she acknowledged that Kathy seemed genuinely kind, and ultimately hoped that they would have the chance to meet again. So, would you like to use the tech race, or maybe the culture mode? Kathy simply tilted her head slightly, an action that reminded Bihina again of Orvi. I really only have practice with the battle mode, is that alright? Bihina only gave a light sigh as she heard that, nodding her head. Yeah, it's fine. Just like every other match, the game started in battle mode. Thanks to Kathy's talkative nature, she had learned on the way to the tournament that she always plays the same race as herself, though Bihina held the faint suspicion that she might have been lying in order to get an advantage later on. Still, as soon as the battle began, she ordered all but one of her initial units to begin digging a trench around the base. If her opponent truly was using a spider-like race, that meant they would likely be able to rapidly produce units. She had to make sure that she was ready for an attack at any time. Because technology would not allow her preparations to proceed quickly enough, Bihina instead chose to pursue the path of magic for this battle. After producing mages, she set them as lookouts at the empty moat surrounding the base. Her chosen race would have incredible land speed for their size, meaning that she won't need to invest points in transportation technology. The most efficient means of attack would be a fast rush. There they are. Sure enough, enemy forces had already shown up on the map, their numbers great enough to easily wipe out an unprepared base. Bihena quickly ordered her mages to ignite the moat, and a wall of fire surrounded her base. The enemy units had upper bodies similar to humans, but the instincts of spiders still remained. They were unwilling to simply throw themselves into the towering fire and stopped as soon as they felt the heat licking against their skin. Time to work fast. Bihena knew that her mages wouldn't be able to hold out forever, so she quickly began mining resources and upgrading both her units and her facilities. The more powerful her mages, the less were needed to maintain the fire barrier. And as long as she kept producing more mages and set them to work in shifts, her defenses would be complete. Across from her, Kathy looked surprised at the appearance of a firewall, but her bright smile quickly returned. She didn't pull back her units, and chose to keep them stationed just outside of Bihena's base, preventing her from being able to expand any further. Every now and then, a new wave of units would come in through the fog of war, adding more to the growing army. Fortify the ground to prevent burrowing tactics. Bihena thought to herself, choosing to invest in a druid to handle her ground fortifications. By now, her mages were on a tight rotation, able to easily maintain the firewall. The only thing that Bihena had to worry about was a sky attack. So once the other defenses were taken care of, she began to invest in anti-air magic cannons. Outside of her small base, there was nothing that could be seen except for an endless wave of dark carapace and pale skin, the numbers far too high to begin counting. Not a single unit that Bihena had spotted had appeared with armor or weapons, and she knew that was unlikely to change. In order to equip themselves, the forces would have to pull back, which would give Bihena room to grow. However, going by Kathy's attack style, she wouldn't give Bihena a single inch. An effective battle plan, but not a wise one. Although Bihena had been stuck within her wall of fire, her forces had grown far stronger. She estimated that a single one of her human mages would be worth at least 1,000 of Kathy's troops. Begin the counterstrike. At her order, another row of mages walked up behind the wall of fire. They did not pass through it, because to do so would be suicide. Instead, they began to silently chant a spell in unison. This was a siege-level spell that was listed in the magic tree, Infernal Eye. When the group chant was complete, the wall of fire surrounding the base seemed to warp, folding in on itself before exploding outwards. Fire bathed the ground, washing out in all directions as the pain-filled screams of Kathy's troops filled Bihena's ears. Yet, doing so had only eliminated the innermost portion of Kathy's forces. Seeing the destruction of their kin, those that were spared had no desire to move in to fill the gap. Even Kathy's face seemed to pale, only able to watch the wall of fire around Bihena's base moving outwards, her base expanding to gradually cover the territory that had been occupied by the slain forces. Until once again the wall of fire had met the enemy forces. This was Bihena's plan. In the face of a defensive battle, burn everything. Leave no land for the enemy to stand on. Of course, as she moved she continued to reinforce the ground, even before the flame wall moved over it. Each expansion took 10 minutes to buy enough mages, enhance their magic, and fire the spell again. And each time, the enemy troops were forced back further and further. After the third expansion, Bihena was able to detect troops hiding beneath the ground, using their companions' bodies to mask their presence. Yet, once the ground above them became reinforced, they were unable to return to the surface. Only after the fifth expansion, when Bihena's base covered a third of the map, did armored troops appear on Kathy's side. However, by that point the flame wall was no longer a simple flame. Even the troops clad in armor were burned to death when they tried to jump through. After the sixth expansion, mages appeared among the arachnid forces. Kathy's face clearly displayed her struggle as she fought to find a solution to her problem. She had spent so many of her points on breeding facilities to bolster the numbers for her troops that she had fallen too far behind in advancing her units. Her mages could not affect the wall of fire at all, and were similarly turned to ash when the base expanding once again. Like this, Bihena continued to expand, wave after wave until she found the mountain that was Kathy's original base. Now the wall of fire had shifted, with Bihena's base covering the rest of the map, and Kathy's being surrounded by the flame. Finally, the mages began to chant a different spell. Hundreds of them gathered in a circle behind the safety of their flaming barrier. The last thing that Bihena saw before the match ended was a flaming rock falling from the sky atop Kathy's mountain. Chapter 176, Finders Keepers. As I watched Bihena play through her rounds, I began to get more of an appreciation for her talent in strategizing. I could tell that she hadn't learned some of the secrets of the game yet, like how you could unlock special types of items by finding different resources. Even I hadn't been aware of that until another keeper told me. Yet, even without that, she was always a step ahead of her enemy. In every game, I saw a pattern from her. She would sacrifice a single troop at the start as a scout to locate the enemy and identify their racial characteristics. After that, she began to create and enact plans to counter that specific type of enemy. Like this, she managed to win match after match. The only time that she seemed to struggle was when she met an opponent with a similar style of play. Both had sacrificed a scout in order to check the enemy's race and location. And this led them both to playing on the defensive until they had built up their forces for a frontal clash. Out of all 20 of her matches, or at least the ones that I watched, she played the battle mode for all but 2 of them. In one, her opponent agreed to the culture mode, which Bihena won by a narrow margin. And in the other, she suffered her one loss when playing the exploration mode. Because Bihena still chose to use humans, her opponent had an easy victory in that match by playing the Arachne. With their numbers and speed advantage, it only took them a few minutes to explore 100% of the map, before Bihena had even sent her troops out. In the end, Bihena solidified her first place lead with a total of 19 wins and 1 loss. The second place went to someone with only 1 less victory, while third went to Kathy. I could see a proud smile on Bihena's face as she stood on the podium, shaking hands with the companion that had hosted the event. Alcahest's custom companion Dinmore wishes to transfer 1,000 points to you through your custom companion Bihena. Authorizing transaction. Transaction approved by host. Do you wish to accept the transaction? Naturally, I chose to accept the prize, as there wasn't even a better reward that we could get from this game. Alright, that makes 1,500 points that we have gotten here. We're making good time. A small smile appeared on my face as I thought about that, and I found myself transferred back out to the keeper's sim room. When I noticed my surroundings again, I was once more in the room with nearly 24 other keepers. Dale? Bihena's voice spoke up from next to me, and I saw her glancing at me with a confused expression. I thought you would have been at a different game by now. I shook my head, chuckling slightly. No, I came to watch this tournament after I was done with mine. You did really good. As I complimented her work, I saw her proud smile once again returning, before another sound made her face pale. Dale, Bihena, Kathy shouted out as she rushed over, her sharp pointed legs clicking against the ground with every step. What's next, huh? You guys are always so much fun. As she said that, she beamed down at us, her smile wide and energetic. And, Spider-Girl aggro has been reacquired. I did my best to hold in a groan while Bihena's shoulders sagged. Glancing up towards Kathy, I shook my head. Well, you know these meetings better than us now. Are there any other fun games? Kathy tilted her head in thought, her legs excitedly clicking against the ground in a fast rhythm. The treasure hunt isn't really that good if you don't know about the host world. Racing always makes me sick. There's a fighting tournament, but I didn't really like it when I tried it. Oh, Kathy's head suddenly shot up as an idea struck her. We can go play Keep the Keeper. I was fairly certain that Bihena and myself shared the same confused look, because Kathy simply giggled playfully. It's this fun little hiding game. A group of 10 people get sent to a tiny world populated by the same kind of people as the Keeper sim games. One of the 10 is randomly chosen to be the keeper of the world, while the other 9 are competing invaders. For the keeper, the goal is to remain hidden for as long as possible. Meanwhile, the invading forces have to find and identify the keeper and catch them. Whoever catches the keeper becomes the keeper for the next round, and it goes until one of the keepers has kept their position for 1 standard hour. Bihena and I listened to the description for the event, and looked at each other. It doesn't seem like an event where we can both participate. I mumbled softly, before shaking my head. I'll handle this one. You can go take care of another game in the meantime. Bihena had a look of relief wash over her when she heard that she wouldn't be part of this game, so I could only imagine how much she was hoping to get away from the eccentric spider girl. She gave a brief nod and rushed out of the room before I could even tease her about it. Kathy's legs audibly slowed their tapping as she watched Behena go. Didn't know you guys had that kind of restriction, or I would have picked something else. She muttered almost sadly. I shook my head with a knowing smile, deciding to change the subject. Well, lead the way. By the way, how did you even become a keeper in the first place? I can't really imagine you killing someone. Oh, well, I could say the same for you, Dale. Kathy spoke with a grin while she began walking towards the door, and I followed alongside. And to be honest, I ate him. Had no idea he was the keeper at the time, though. I felt a cold shiver run down my spine as she said that. You ate him? Yup. She nodded her head, showing that I did not misinterpret her words. Or I started to, at least. It's always best to eat your mate quickly, so that the babies can grow up nice and strong. Unfortunately, you can probably guess what happened when I got started. Kathy's shoulders slumped down, as if it were a rather depressing memory. Should not have asked. I could only force myself to nod my head. Why, yeah, I can guess. Poor guy. Got lost in the moment and forgot to ascend before she took action. We walked the rest of the way in silence. Well, aside from Kathy humming happily and her legs chittering against the ground. Sure enough, the door that she had led us to was labeled, "Keep the Keeper." Once inside, we found the room almost empty. All except for one person along the far wall, who was no doubt the companion managing this game. This one was a male, dark red skin with sharp horns poking above his black hair. If you give it a few minutes, they're almost done, he said as we entered, briefly glancing up at us. I returned his advice with a nod, moving to rest against the nearby wall as Kathy simply stood in place. Sure enough, it was roughly 10 or so minutes later when a blue light filled the room, and 10 keepers emerged from nowhere. All right, everyone, we got a winner. The red-skinned companion called out. Everyone, a round of applause for Starkiller. As he said that, he pointed towards the crowd, which parted to reveal a small girl. She looked embarrassed by all of the attention, and her cheeks turned a light red. Her race was very clearly not human, with white fur covering her from head to toe. She had digitigrade legs, long whiskers, and tall white ears poking up over her head. That's right, she looked like an anthropomorphic rabbit girl. Thanks, she whispered out, slowly walking towards the companion to shake his head. It was really fun. A few of the keepers gathered gave bitter laughs, shaking their heads while the companion transferred the prize to her. All right, now, how many of you are sticking around for the next round? Only one prize? I blinked in confusion, before remembering that this was a game for only 10 players. It wasn't odd for it to only have a single winner per round. And it wouldn't be strange for the prize points to be fairly low either. Thankfully, none of the other keepers seemed interested in leaving. However, this actually made things difficult for the companion. 11 people. This is supposed to be a 10-player game. He had a complicated expression on his face, before closing his eyes. Just a second, everyone. When he opened his eyes again a moment later, he gave a quick nod. All right, looks like we have approval to run the game with an extra player. Doesn't change the rules any. Hider. Keep yourself hidden as long as possible. Seekers, find the hider. Whoever stays hidden for a cumulative hour first wins 500 points. The terminology was a bit different to how Kathy explained it, but it seemed that he had simplified the rules to avoid repeating himself too much. Either way, when the window appeared in front of us, it gave an explanation closer to what Kathy had said. It also gave the option to choose what we looked like when we competed in this game. There were options to adjust hair color, height, even race. You could even set it to randomize each time to keep people guessing. Naturally, I chose to randomize everything but my race and gender. While it might be a bit disorienting to adjust to a new height, it wouldn't give myself away as much as if I had to adjust to a completely new race. Once everyone had finished going through their selections, blue light filled the room again, forcing me to close my eyes. When I opened them, I found myself standing on top of a tall concrete building with at least 20 floors. Across from me was another identical building, but nothing else could be seen. Rather, there was nothing else to be seen. A patch of street connected the two buildings, but everything else was a black void. Endless darkness as far as could be seen. You have taken the role of Invader 5. Find the keeper and capture them in order to advance to the next round. I raised an eyebrow as I saw that description, before turning and looking around the roof. There were a few people wandering around, almost aimlessly. Some like myself were humans, others looked like elves, dwarves, harpies, even an arachne or two. The only way down into the building was a stairwell behind an open door, which had people slowly coming and going through it. Okay. So I have to identify which of these are the other invaders, and which is the keeper. I thought to myself, before looking down at my own body. Currently, I was in the form of a teenager, short blonde hair with calloused hands, likely a farmer. My height would make it harder for me to read the expressions of the people around me, but would also help keep myself hidden. Giving a brief nod, I walked calmly towards the stairwell, doing my best to keep my expression neutral like the throng of people around me. This was going to be a very different kind of game. And to be honest, I wasn't all that confident in my chances at this one. At least, not when it came to finding a single keeper out of a crowd of hundreds of random faces. Chapter 177, A More Fitting Game. From my brief glance over the two buildings where our game was hosted this time, I knew the rough layout of the area. Unless one of the others had spawned on either the rooftops or the connecting stretch of road, this gave me a slight advantage. I knew the scope of the playing field. At the same time, though, that advantage was minuscule at best. With the sheer number of NPCs walking about, it was near impossible to tell which ones were the players. Every now and then, I would get suspicious of one that bumped into someone, but their expressions showed no change. I could think of a few different strategies of how to win this game. Naturally, the easiest was if you were the designated keeper. You could just find a safe place to hide and wait out the time. Going by my own experience, nobody had access to mana, or ki, or any special energies that would let them locate a target. For the searching group, however, things were harder. Theoretically, they could capture everyone they met, and eventually they might get the keeper. But doing so would make their activities obvious, and thus avoidable. As I thought to myself, I continued walking alongside a harpy woman that I had encountered shortly after I left the top floor. To ensure that she wasn't my target, I grabbed the back of her neck as soon as we had been out of sight of most possible observers. The method of capturing was simply to firmly grab any part of a target's body, after all. She stiffened briefly on reflex as she was grabbed, and I heard a faint whimper from her throat as I held the back of her neck. However, the round did not progress, so obviously this was not my target. The reaction did serve to remind me that these were all really people, each one simply playing the role that they were assigned. Surely, some of them had worries that they would be mistreated in these games. Sorry, I whispered as I released her neck, and her tense body seemed to relax slightly. Once she seemed sure that I wasn't going to do anything else, she began to walk away. This was when I started following alongside her. Her eyes betrayed the worry that she felt, but I could only shake my head. I just need a guide. I spoke, but the worry did not lessen. However, she did not speak, as if that was against the rules of participation for these people. Or maybe she simply did not understand me. Either way, she continued to walk aimlessly around the first building. Sometimes she would randomly turn around and backtrack. Other times she would walk in circles in the middle of a room. To me, it seemed that they had been told to move in as random of a pattern as possible, since I caught others behaving in a similar manner. However, as I was watching her, I felt someone grab my wrist. Caught you. Turning around, I saw that my captor was a tall man with 3 rows of orange eyes and pitch black skin. Though, when he saw that the round wasn't ending as well, he simply grumbled. Releasing my hand, he sank back into the crowd, his expression going blank as he followed the random patterns of the various inhabitants. Shaking my head, I moved to leave the first building, heading over to the second. On the first building, the layout of each floor had been identical. A single, giant room full of cubicles, and a row of offices lining each wall. When I arrived at the second building, I saw that it was exactly the same. However, as I entered the building, I heard a faint screech from above me, a cry of surprise. At the same time, time seemed to freeze around us. The motions of every person froze in unison, including my own. A voice echoed throughout this miniature world, the same voice of the companion that was hosting the event. Keeper Sentinel 7 has been found. Time, 16 standard minutes. Beginning next round. Before I even had time to question how Kathy had been found, the world was washed away with blue light. Now, I stood just over 6 feet tall, with a strong muscular build. I was no longer between two tall buildings, and instead I seemed to be in a zoo. Or at least, I assumed it was a zoo. There was a stone pathway with display cages on either side, some open and some enclosed. But all were empty, and the plaques that would identify the inhabitants were blank. Once again, however, the area was populated with a wide array of characters wandering around aimlessly. It was at this point that I realized I really didn't stand a chance at this game. Let's not mention the fact that it was largely based on luck whether I even appeared near the target. For instance, in the first round I was not even in the same building, and had barely made it out of the one I was in before the round ended. Aside from that, I had to read hundreds of faces at once and look for one that had even the slightest fluctuation while making sure nobody else could do the same to me. The game was by no means impossible, it was just an incredibly terrible match for my set of skills, compared to the others who have practiced with it. And sure enough, out of 8 rounds, I did not catch the keeper once. I got close one time, having found someone that looked suspicious and approached them. But by the time I got there, someone else had already caught him. When the game ended, and we were all sent back, I let out a sigh of relief that we were finally out of that game. And the winner is Tropparella, the companion declared, pointing towards a human-looking keeper male. Shaking my head, I turned to walk out of the room before I heard Kathy's voice calling out behind me. "Where are you going, Dale?" She called out in an almost panic, rushing over to catch up with me. I let out a dry chuckle, turning around to smile at her. "Sorry, I don't really think this game suits me. I was going to go try my luck somewhere else." "Oh." Kathy gave a small nod, seeming to understand. Glancing back towards the room, she turned her head to face me again. "Well, can I come with you? I don't really have a whole lot of friends in these meetings." That made me raise an eyebrow. "Why not? I figured that you would have joined a guild rather quickly." Kathy puffed her cheeks out, crossing her arms in front of her as her spider legs clicked and clacked against the stone floor. "I got invited to join the gilded branch, but they sound too much like a business. I just want to have fun, you know? I was going to start up my own guild, but it takes a bunch of points to do, and I don't have those kinds of funds." I shrugged my shoulders, shaking my head with a small smile. "Well, no reason you can't join me. Not sure what game I'll head for next, though. I've got to try to earn some points to get myself ready for the games." Kathy nodded her head quickly, a bright smile on her face. "All right, well, in that case, you could try your luck on the big game," she suggested with a knowing smile. "There's this one game that the guild always has, that is only a single-player game. They call it the Trials of a Keeper." As Kathy spoke, she led me out of the room, and down towards the very end of the hall, to the door that sat alone at the end. You get thrown into a set of problems, and have to come up with a solution using as few points as possible. If you pass the trials, the guild awards you 5,000 points. Of course, you can only get the reward once, and they won't let you try again even in another meeting. I couldn't help but chuckle knowingly when I heard that. Did you try to run the trials again to get more prizes? However, unexpectedly, Kathy chuckled in embarrassment. No, I never managed to pass the first time. This is just what they explained to me back then. I glanced at the door, and then back to Kathy, but she only waved for me to go in. Come on, you said you needed points urgently. I'll just wait out here for you. I gave a brief nod, opening the door and stepping inside. Like she said, this was a single-player game. The purpose wasn't to beat other players, but just to pass a test. Inside, the only other occupant was a female human with green hair down to her waist. Her body was covered in a silk toga, the right side of her chest on display. Yet, she did not seem embarrassed by this outfit at all. Are you here to take the trials? She asked in a serious tone. When I answered with a nod, she continued. Have the rules been explained to you? Somewhat, I told her, before repeating what Kathy had told me about this test. I didn't want to run the risk that she left out a vital piece of information. And when I was done, the woman nodded her head. You will not be allowed the use of a companion during this test. All answers must come from yourself. The maximum score is 10,000 points. The passing grade is 5,000. For every point you spend to solve a problem, 1 point will be deducted from your final score. For 1,000 points, you may ask for a hint. There is no time limit to these trials. Taking a deep breath, she looked directly at me. Are you ready? I nodded my head sharply, processing the rules that she had explained. Since I knew the scoring mechanic, then I would have an idea of how to proceed. The only problem was the fact that I did not know how many trials I would have to face. If there were 100, then even spending an average of 50 points per test would eliminate me. As soon as I confirmed that I was ready, I was moved into another room. This room appeared to be the same one as I was in when I had watched Bihena. Or at least, it was identical. The only difference was the display on the wall, which now showed a map that I was unfamiliar with. Along the bottom of the screen was a blue window of text, no doubt my objective. First trial. Your world is in danger. A series of supervolcanoes threaten to wipe out life on the planet. You must preserve at least 50% of your world population to pass. Along the map was a series of red dots in various sizes, each one pulsating. These no doubt represented the supervolcanoes. At the side of the screen was a series of windows, listing my available assets. Things such as gods or goddesses, what races were on the world, and any special systems that may be able to help me. Unfortunately, there was no god of fire, earth, or volcanoes. Or anything remotely similar, so it wasn't just a matter of commanding them to do their job. Father, this isn't actually happening, right? I was surprised to hear Leowin's shaky voice, as I had expected my connection to be cut with her for this game. No, this should just be a simulation, like all of the other games. I debated taking advantage of this unexpected twist to bounce ideas off of her, but shook my head at the thought. Most of these scenarios would no doubt be beyond the scope that Leowin was used to dealing with. Anyways, the answer to this trial was still fairly easy, and there were a number of ways to go about it. I could communicate with the world to have them take shelter from the coming eruptions, but that was risky. It was possible to just stop the eruptions manually, but doing so would require 10 points per volcano. Given that there were 23 in total, I didn't want to spend so many points. Searching through the market, I quickly found what I was looking for. A mineral with the property of absorbing heat. I had a feeling that there would be something like this, since I remembered the presence of the lightning ore. Spending 15 points from the trial balance, I chose to purchase the ore and place veins of it throughout and beneath the 23 volcanoes. First trial. Passed. The presence of the heat rock has caused the magma within the volcanoes to cool. Although many still erupt, the loss of the volcanic ash limits their destructive force. Population saved, 96%. Chapter 178, The Exam. The following tests were similar in many ways to the first. Each one tested a keeper's ability to judge what needed to be done. For instance, in the second test, what threatened the world was an ice age. This test was actually fairly simple, as there was a god of fire listed as one of the assets. I simply instructed the god to guide people to shelters while offering them a blessing of warmth to help them survive. Other tests included things like droughts, famines, or even plagues. In some cases, I was able to get through it without spending any points at all, whereas others I was forced to spend a few. And, as the tests progressed, new and difficult trials seemed to appear. For instance, the first one that made me really pause. 16th trial. Your world is in danger. A stray meteor has been detected on a collision course with your world. If it is not stopped, your world will be destroyed. For this trial, the world I was in charge of was still young, far too young to be able to get rid of a meteor hurtling towards it. At most, they could be considered in the Bronze Age. Throwing swords and spears would do nothing. And there was no god of space, or even a god of stone that could take control of the meteor to move it away. The only gods I had to work with were gods of medicine, crafting, magic, and fire. Although fire was often associated with shooting stars, that was really only after they entered the atmosphere, and at that point it would be too late. As for the god of magic, the level of magic in the world was not enough that even a god would be able to stop the meteor. In the end, I could only come up with a few options. I could either purchase an entity from the market like Alcazar to get rid of the meteor, or take care of it myself. Out of the two, the latter was far cheaper. Purchasing a time zone, I surrounded the meteor with it and simply paused it in time while the world moved on, until it was no longer in its path. But this wasn't the only trial that made me pause. Immediately after that was a trial where a demon lord had arisen in my world. The system warned that its combat ability would be greater than my own, and would likely be able to kill me if we fought. This time, I couldn't avoid bringing in the dragon. By the time I hit the 50th trial, I was beginning to wonder just how long this would take. Since I took my time answering each test patiently, I had already been in here for several hours. In fact, I had already gotten another 1,000 points from Bihina winning a game, though I did not know what she had won. As for my own score in the exams, I had managed to use only 1,200 points from the 10,000 total after the 50th trial. At this point, I couldn't be sure if I was doing good or not. However, I had the feeling that I was on the right track. From my understanding, there were no take-backs in these exams. If you spent points on an answer that turned out to be wrong, those points were still spent. Sometimes, the wrong answer might even make the problem worse. With my philosophy of not acting until I had an answer I was sure of, I avoided wasting points. Especially since I didn't ask for any hints. 61st trial. Congratulations, you have overcome the invasion of a powerful enemy keeper. However, your world is in ruins. You must prepare yourself for the next invasion to occur in 100 standard days. And then there were tests like this. Things that I was not even really ready for, because my worlds were not advanced that far. I knew that there was one easy answer, which was to completely reset the world and start from scratch. And, call me stubborn, but that's not an answer that I wanted to choose. Thankfully, this one had a plethora of gods at my disposal, so I had another alternative. In the list of resources, the enemy remains were an option. With the use of the gods, I had commands sent down to the world to salvage the remains and study them. After that, I chose to fast forward. Each trial was making me take longer to think it over, to make sure that I got it right on the first try. At the same time, there were fewer and fewer tests where I could avoid spending points. At one point, I started to believe that even asking for one hint might make the entire trial impossible to pass. 99th trial. A war wages among the stars. Civilizations spanning countless systems have become hostile to one another on the eve of an invasion, with one side blaming you for the invading forces. Your goal is to ensure the fighting potential of your world before the invasion begins, or the invading forces may ally with those hostile to you. I was starting to feel tired at this point, not physically, but mentally. Looking at my balance, I still had 7,200 out of the original 10,000 remaining. I had lost track of the amount of time spent in this trial, and was almost positive that Kathy would not still be waiting outside the room for me anymore. If she didn't have the patience to complete the trial herself, then surely she wouldn't be able to sit around and do nothing for all that time. Shaking my head, I looked at the list of assets I could use for this test. Given the scope of the problem, the assets listed were simply enormous. If I took my time to read through and understand each one, I might be here for days. So instead, I looked at the list of deities available to me. Thankfully, there was a long and extensive list of deities for me to use as well. Any type of domain I could wish for was represented. The only problem was how to use them. If the world involved knew about the existence of keepers, then there was no doubt that they also knew about several things that keepers could do. If I tried to take the slow approach, and get the gods to try peacefully resolving the situation, the hostile faction wouldn't listen. After all, the gods are under the command of the keeper themselves, so why would they listen to the enemy's words? Similarly, if they knew about the keeper's ability to influence culture, then they would be suspicious towards anyone born with different beliefs. Ultimately, there were a number of general answers that could be used here. Since the hostile faction is against the gods, pull all the gods back to stop them from helping that faction, and instead help the others. With all of the advancements in technology from the hostile party being fed to their enemies, they couldn't gain a technological advantage. Then, with the help of the gods, relay the hostile faction's battle strategies to allied commanders. The main problem with this was resources, as the map provided showed that the hostile faction had secured several key worlds rich with rare materials. Even if the designs for new technology were passed along, the allied troops might not be able to take advantage of it without the proper components. However, having all of the gods actively favor one side was definitely a critical component of this test. If a peaceful answer couldn't be reached, then what was needed was an overwhelming victory. And even with the help of the gods, although this would be a surefire victory, it would not come without the loss of overall power in the world. With an invasion just around the corner, and the opponent paired up for the world at its strongest. Any such drop in power could prove fatal. So, I had to turn to the market for additional help. I needed to get a new technology or magic that was able to give the Allied troops a new edge, strengthening them enough to balance the loss of power that would come from destroying the hostile forces. What I chose in the end were blueprints for a powerful shield for vehicles, utilizing both magic and science. The strength of the shields should prove enough to nullify the weapons that the hostile faction possessed. However, buying those blueprints cost me a full 2,000 points. I closed my eyes, praying that my answer had been good enough for the system, and more so praying that I would not have to spend any more points on the rest of the tests. With my new balance down just above 5,000, I couldn't spare anything else while still keeping a passing grade. 99th trial. Passed. Through the use of overwhelming defenses and the aid of the Keeper's companions, you have eliminated the rebel faction without causing a large decrease in the overall level of the world. You have passed the 99 trials of a Keeper with a total score of 5,210 thousandths. I nearly fell back into the chair and passed out from exhaustion when I read the final announcement. However, I soon realized that I was no longer alone in the room. The toga-wearing companion that had been the one to send me into this game was now standing in the far corner of the room, her eyes locked onto me. "Congratulations, Earth Force One." She spoke without a hint of emotion in her tone. "You have passed the trials, and are eligible to receive the reward. I have already logged your success with the Gilded Branch, so future attempts will not yield additional prizes." As she spoke, she walked closer, extending one slender hand for me to grasp. With a tired nod, I reached out to grab her hand. Though, the message that appeared next surprised me. "Caretaker has transferred 5,000 points to your balance." I blinked in surprise, looking up at the woman I thought had been a companion for Grimmer. However, it turned out that she herself was a Keeper. Yet, by the time I was able to look up, I was standing once again in the hallway outside of the room. Off to my left, I noticed that Kathy was indeed waiting, in a way. Her 8 legs were splayed out on the ground, her feminine upper body laying flat on the floor with her eyes closed. Her body rose and fell slightly with each breath, showing that she had passed out while trying to wait for me. Shaking my head, I reviewed the points that we had acquired so far. Bihena had won a total of 2,000 points while I was in the trials. Combine that with my 5,000, and the points we had earned before, and we had gotten a total of 8,500 points so far in the meeting. "Kathy, wake up," I spoke to the sleeping spider girl, knowing that it would be incredibly rude for me to just walk off and leave her sleeping there. She stirred at my words, her legs seeming to flex back up before relaxing once again. "Kathy, it's Dale. Time to get up." Dale, just a few more minutes," she murmured, shaking her head slightly and burying her face in her arms. "If you don't get up, I'm just going to go find another game to play while I wait." I couldn't help but smirk as I said that, looking down at the large arachne. "Ugh, fine, I'm up," she whined pitifully, pushing her upper body back up with her hands while her legs got below her to lift her up. "How do you do?" she asked, wiping at her eyes before letting out a small yawn. "I passed, eventually. It took a lot longer than what I had expected." When I answered honestly, she nodded as if she knew all along. "Yeah, they get really boring. But you did good, though. You passed, and that puts you closer to what you want, right?" I gave a brief nod to answer that. "Now I just have to find Bihena. With any luck, we can go home soon." Kathy lowered her head slightly when she heard that, a downcast expression on her face. "Home, right. Once you qualify for the games, maybe I could come visit?" she asked in a hopeful tone. "The companions in my place are all super annoying, and I'd love to get the chance to meet the rest of yours. If it's all right, of course." I recalled Grimmer once telling me that there was no charge for Keepers in the games to invite others to their admin rooms. "I don't see why not." I nodded, before turning around. "Let's go find Bihena first, though." Chapter 179, Bihena's Kathy. It took us a while to find where Bihena had gone off to. With nearly 40 rooms to check, it wasn't until we got to the one labeled World Champion that we finally found her. With the amount of time that had passed, several Keepers seemed to have already cleared out of the meeting. This made the population of each room barely half of what it had been before. So, when we saw that Bihena was in a room with only 5 other people, it wasn't all that surprising. Though, I was somewhat confused by the name of the game, since it seemed quite similar to the fighting tournament that I had been a part of. And to my surprise, the companion managing this even did not stop us from approaching Bihena, which likely meant that this was one of the games where it was possible for the keeper and companion to act together. Huh? Bihena seemed to notice our approach, likely through the clicking of Kathy's pointed feet against the ground, and turned around to look at us. She was standing at a stage, much like any of the other games that were played. Inside the stage, we could see two people battling. Both seemed to be human, though one was clad in armor and the other a cybernetic suit. "You found me, huh?" she asked with a small smile. "Yeah, sorry, was in the middle of a very long game." I groaned, shaking my head. "Mind explaining what's going on here?" As the fighters in the ring continued to fight, Bihena nodded her head briefly. "All right, that shouldn't be too much of a problem. This tournament is designed to test your ability to raise a group of fighters. You can select or design a race, adjust the systems of the world that they live in, and then the game produces 6 fighters that represent the strongest force that the world would have to offer once the world reaches a certain level of power. And then you have them fight in one-on-one matches?" I asked, raising an eyebrow as I saw the armored soldier send out a golden wave of energy towards the cybernetic human, tearing the man's arm from his body. Sparks, oil and blood washed down onto the stage as the now crippled fighter let out a pained scream. "That's right," Bihena agreed, not seeming to mind the scream. Or maybe she had gotten used to it by this point. "This is my second time through the tournament, and I think I should be able to bring a surprise this time." I gave a small nod as I heard that. "All right, after this tournament is over, we can head home then. Between this and the royalties we should have gotten, we should have enough to take the final steps now." Bihena let out a relieved sigh, her shoulders sagging slightly. "Oh good, I don't think that there are any other games that I would be able to win in. It took me over an hour just to find this one." As she spoke, her armored soldier cleanly decapitated the cybernetic combatant. "And Earth Force 1 will move on to the final round." The companion, a winged female that looked similar to a harpy, spoke up. Her hands and feet were talons, and her arms had her white wings attached to them. Her outfit was a simple golden dress that fell loosely over her body. "Their opponent will be Starkiller." I blinked in surprise when I heard the familiar name, turning to see the same bashful-looking, white-furred rabbit that had won the glorified game of hide and seek. Her head was lowered when her name was called, one of her ears twitching as if to show her embarrassment. Quietly, she walked up towards the stage that Bihena was at, waiting for her previous opponent to move before taking his place. "You take care of me, okay?" she asked, looking up at Bihena and offering a nervous smile. Bihena simply sighed, shaking her head as she turned her attention back towards the match. "Let me guess, you're going with the same setup as last time?" she asked dryly, showing that she had encountered this Starkiller in the last tournament already. Well, it's all I really know. And it works really well with them. Should I do something different?" Starkiller looked at Bihena hopefully, as if trying to earn some advice from her. "It's your decision," Bihena told her plainly, and I could see her quickly navigating her way through a menu that appeared with a practiced ease. It seemed that she knew her way around the controls after having played through the tournament once before. And although she was moving too quickly for me to properly make out everything she chose, I was able to get a few pieces of information. For instance, the race that she chose was human, like she always did in the Keeper Sim matches. For the setting, she chose a game world, which brought up a window with a number of templates for her to choose from. However, rather than going with a template, she simply selected Import Owned System at the bottom. That likely meant that she was bringing in the game system from my own Earth. Aside from that, she selected all of the various systems that we had in place on Earth, such as achievements and quest scrolls, and even the guild and kingdom systems. Everything that she picked actually seemed to be an option already present in our own world. At least, until the end, where she chose a system that we didn't have yet. This final system was called Parties. Although I did not have time to read through the description that the game offered, it should be the same type of party mechanics that are found in most games. I'd have to take a look at it later to figure out exactly what it had to offer that made Bihena added to the world she was establishing. However, once she was done, she immediately hit the Ready button. Across from us, Starkiller was still fumbling through the menu. It didn't seem that she was having a hard time deciding what to choose, but trying to find where the options were. At least, if her quiet mumblings were any indication. Don't mind her, Bihena said with a sigh. She's always like that. You know her? I couldn't help but ask in surprise, seeing how this was Bihena's first time meeting other keepers. Logically, she shouldn't be so familiar with any of them. Bihena's response was to groan, shaking her head. After you went to play that game with Kathy, I saw her in the Keeper's Cards tournament. Since then, I guess that you could say she's become my Kathy. Oh, I see. I had a feeling that I knew what she meant, but when I glanced back, Kathy was just tilting her head in confusion. I take it she tends to stick to the same routine, then? Going by what you said before. Yeah, Bihena nodded her head in agreement. Her lips pursed slightly. She always picks the same race as her, which she calls a fert. She uses a cultivation system that combines the 4 basic energies, and it's actually quite powerful in the card game. She managed to get the championship there, but waited for me to finish so that we could play together again. If I had to guess, she's probably looking for the profound laws of her system. I can hear you, you know, Starkiller called back, a pouting expression on her face as her ears bent low. 1 foot stomping against the ground. I told you last time, the import option is at the very bottom. Bihena replied, shaking her head. Starkiller blinked, glancing down to her own menu before lowering her head. I knew that. She weakly lifted one of her furred hands up to press a button, and a moment later more options began appearing on the screen. At this point, we are given various side quests. Bihena explained as she read through each window that appeared before quickly selecting an option. These are development choices that occur throughout the world. Things such as wars or famine. You can choose to get involved or to let them handle it themselves. Typically, letting them handle it lets them grow stronger. However, if you leave it up to themselves too many times, they could simply go extinct, and you automatically lose the game. Interfering with each choice is the safe option, but your forces will come out a bit less skilled. As she said that, Bihena pressed the last option on the final window that appeared. Surprisingly, Starkiller was already done by the time Bihena finished. It was hard to tell if she just read the options faster, or just picked the same thing for every choice to speed things up. Next, 6 blue screens appeared each in front of Starkiller and Bihena. Although we couldn't see what was on Starkiller's, Bihena's each contained a differently dressed human. And these are the fighters that I have to work with, she explained again, motioning an arm towards the screens. Each one had a basic list of stats for the combatant, as well as a brief summary of their skills and specialties. At this point, I just have to decide which order they will go out. Saying that much, Bihena went silent, quietly debating the various options. First, she selected a warrior armed in silver-colored gear, listed as a Templar. Second, a female wizard with an aged face. Third, an elemental monk with a peaceful expression. Then fourth and fifth she placed a warrior and druid respectively. For the 6th slot, she placed what was obviously the strongest of the 6. Someone whose main class was listed as hero. In his description, he was listed as the hero that has entered the realm of the perfect self. I couldn't help but be surprised, as that no doubt meant he had unlocked the advanced class that nobody in my own world had gotten yet. Once again, Starkiller was already done choosing her arrangements long before Bihena. As soon as her 6th fighter was chosen, the match began immediately. Bihena let out a brief sigh as she saw the rabbit-looking person appear on Starkiller's side of the stage. Walking on air. All right, this should go pretty quickly. Bihena crossed her arms beneath her chest as she watched the match. The Templar in silver was wrapped in a golden light as he struck out at the flying fert. Her cultivation techniques are pretty strong. In a game like Keeper's Cards, she pretty much can't be beat if you give her time to build. But in a game where the level of power is even, it's a different matter. The fert casually blocked the first strike of the Templar with the back of his hand. Though a bloody mark appeared on it, when he lashed out, his fist flying forward, the air seemed to buckle around it. Because the system focuses on the systematic development of all the energy types, there's a limit to what she can do here. If I had to say it, her fighters are stuck in their 2nd cultivation stage. They have mastered the use of their ki sufficiently, and have started to cultivate natural energy. But in terms of spiritual energy or mana, most haven't touched it. As she spoke, the Templar raised his sword to the sky, a golden barrier surrounding him to block the force of the Furt's punch. Most? I asked, curious exactly how much she knew about this. It seemed that she had the time to study Starkiller's system quite a bit, or had been told about it in conversation. Well, there are rare cases where someone is born with difficulty cultivating ki. Instead, they begin with mana, which is normally the last step for someone cultivating normally. Similarly, there is the very rare case where someone takes both paths at once, though she won't have anyone like that. Although those people are strong enough to be considered to force themselves in the card game, they don't have enough time to grow here, and are less capable than normal cultivators. As she explained things, the Templar burst forth with a wave of energy, launching himself at the frustrated Furt. When he swung his sword, golden light filled the sky, and the Furt's body was cut in half. Across from us, Starkiller stared at Bihina with watery eyes, stomping her foot on the ground again. "You don't have to criticize it so harshly, you know," she complained. "It's a really cool system. Really, I spent a lot of time fine-tuning it." Chapter 180, The Life of Magic. From what I could tell, each of the fighters on standby were able to observe the previous matches. At least, that was my assumption when the second round began, given how the attitude of the second Furt was so different compared to the first. Unlike the first fighter that had an air of arrogance around him, this one launched a berserk charge immediately. The Templar, still on the stage after the previous fight, seemed to be caught off guard by the sudden charge. He lifted his shield to block, only having time to release the faintest golden light before a white-furred fist impacted against the shield. His body lifted off the ground, flying back against the wall like an arrow fired from a bow. I couldn't help but wince as I saw him crashing against the wall of the arena. Although he had managed to preserve his life with the hasty defense, I could see that his shield arm was hanging limply from its socket, clearly unable to be used. By the time that he pulled himself off of the wall, the Furt practitioner was performing a strange movement at the position that he had launched the Templar from. His furred hands came together in front of his chest, as if praying, and then began to slowly rotate his arms out in wide opposing circular motions. Bihina clenched her fists against the edge of the stage as she watched the rabbit-like fur shift from white to a bloody red. "That luck," she muttered, before shaking her head. Once the shift in the fur was complete, the Furt began to emit a red cloud from his body like smoke. For a moment, it reminded me of the martial spirits back on Earth. "Is that?" I couldn't help but ask towards Bihina, who simply shook her head in response. "No, he's not combined his ki with his spirit. This is one of Starkiller's profound laws. Everyone's ki is different, having an affinity similar to elemental ki. Sometimes, the difference is pronounced enough to get things like this. In our last match, she only had one person like that, so she explained it after the fight. "I keep telling you to call me by my name," Starkiller shouted from the other side of the stage, stomping her foot again. Bihina continued on as if she hadn't heard her opponent's words. "Anyways, this guy looks like his ki has a blood affinity. The one last time was lightning, so I'm not sure what special abilities to expect here. Either way, we can't get involved in the fight anymore." "Moo." Starkiller's shoulders sagged, before she turned to look at me. "You're her keeper, right? Can you tell her to call me by my name?" "I'm Baloo." "Baloo." I gave a small chuckle as I watched the exchange. Though I saw a corner of Bihina's mouth rise up slightly, it seemed that she did find some enjoyment in teasing the Furt keeper. However, my attention was quickly drawn towards the stage, as I witnessed for the first time the effects of the profound laws. The red mist around the Furt's body twisted and distorted, lashing out in strands as he sent one fist forward. Although there was no force behind the fist itself, the red mist quickly launched at the helpless Templar. As soon as it made contact with his body, the blood dripping from the Templar's left arm seemed to rise up to meet it. After that, nothing seemed to happen. In fact, it was hard to tell if the battle was still going on or not, as both parties stood there motionlessly. Only Baloo across from us laughed happily. "Puppet, puppet, so he's a puppet master." It was hard to properly understand her words until another figure suddenly appeared on the stage. This time, it was elderly female wizard. However, the Templar from before was still standing. "He's already dead," I muttered under my breath, understanding that that was the only reason why the game would continue on to the next round. "Come on, snap out of it quickly. She's about to kill you," Baloo suddenly shouted out while a blue mana spread from the wizard's feet. However, both the practitioner and the Templar seemed frozen in place. This was my first time seeing a genuine spell of what should be the fourth tier. And I was only able to recognize the difference because of the visual disparity between it and what I know. There was no circle, no grand confinement for the spell. Symbols floated around the mage's body like runes before settling at her feet and expanding. Within the symbols, I could see intricately detailed spheres and cubes, pyramids and cones, and even some shapes that were hard to classify, each with their own geometric shapes carved along them. Although none of them appeared nearly as complex as the spell that Mean Green had fired off in our last match, it was still a sight to behold. It took several long moments for all of the shapes to fall into position around the woman's feet, before they began to shift in size and position, overlapping with one another. Just looking at the finished product and trying to understand it was enough to make my head hurt, so I could only imagine the strain in casting such a spell. Once the spell was apparently complete, the collection of shapes collapsed in on itself. Finally, it formed into the shape of a golden ball of light. The female wizard smiled affectionately at that light before it shot off at the still frozen practitioner. As the light shot towards him, the practitioner seemed to finally break himself free of whatever state he was in. However, by then, it was far too late. He had only the briefest moment to move his head before the light slammed against his chest, seeming to dig would not be the right word. The flesh that the light hit seemed to be erased. As the little golden orb passed through the Furt's body, he seemed to simply collapse, the life immediately drained from him. However, the golden light did not disappear. Rather, it flew back towards its caster, circling around her like a tamed pet. Bihena's smile grew as she saw the result of the fight. "It should be over now," she said confidently, as another Furt appeared. Once again, the golden light shot out from next to the wizard, who seemed to be casually standing in the center of the stage. Having seen the result of being hit by the spell, the Furt practitioner immediately began to dodge at an insane speed. In fact, his speed was far greater than what the light could keep up with, which allowed him to immediately appear next to the wizard that cast the spell. Rather than fighting the terrifying light, he seemed more prepared to fight the frail woman. At the moment just before the Furt's fist landed on the wizard, the golden ball blinked out of existence, appearing in front of the advancing fist. Rather, it was better to say that the golden ball of light and the wizard had exchanged places. Yet the result was the same, as the Furt's power was focused entirely on offense. With no time to pull back or raise his defenses, his fist collided with the light, being erased just like how the previous one's chest had been. What was even worse was that the spell seemed to cling to his body, staying on him even when he explosively launched himself backwards. "Oh, that's just not fair," Baloo shouted out from across the stage, glaring pitifully towards Bihena. Bihena could only shrug as she heard that. "Don't look at me, I'm not even sure what that spell is." When Bihena admitted that, Baloo turned to look at me instead, but I could only shake my head helplessly. This was my first time seeing such a terrifying spell as well. Well, if they can't avoid it, surely they can crush it. Baloo convinced herself with a nod, though I had a feeling that there was more to it than that. Given how long the spell had taken to prepare, it couldn't be simple, even among fourth-tier spells. I'm sure that the wizard had other cards she could have played if her opponent was active at the time. But the fact that she chose to use this means it should be her ultimate trump card. A destructive spell with intelligence, and the ability to instantly swap places with its caster. In the next round, it showed one more ability as well. Just like Baloo had said, the next competitor aimed to simply destroy the golden ball with overwhelming power. And sure enough, it was shattered into specks of golden light when struck by an all-out attack from this practitioner. However, those golden specks did not disappear. Rather, they turned into needles of light that stabbed into the Furt's chest. And when he fell, the golden ball once again appeared. "I give up," Baloo said, helplessly shaking her head. "That spell is a total cheat. From looking at it, it would take specific magic elements to break it, right? But none of my guys are magic users, or can nullify magic." Bihena shrugged her shoulders at that. "I don't know, maybe an area attack that would hit both the ball and the wizard could kill her and end the spell?" Baloo gave a sad smile at that. "No, that shouldn't be the case." As she spoke, the stage darkened, showing that Starkiller really had given up the match. "Spells like that, I think I saw one before." It wasn't this system of magic, so naturally it looked different. Her tone sounded different now compared to her childish self before, as if she was revealing a bit of her experience. When a spell is given life, it's not tied to its creator anymore. That thing would have just killed everyone that appeared in the ring without discrimination. Or maybe it was set to only attack my people, I don't know. Either way, this is your win. Bihina blinked in surprise as she saw this new side of Starkiller. Baloo? She asked, her voice laced with concern. However, at that moment Baloo suddenly lifted her head to stare at Bihina, a wide smile on her face. You said my name, she shouted out, hopping into the air happily. No taking it back now, you said it. Bihina groaned, shaking her head. Why did I even bother? She muttered quietly, though the clacking of pointed feet briefly distracted me. She is weird, Kathy said behind us, her presence practically forgotten in the midst of the game. And I don't think I like this game. It wouldn't be very good for me. Her head shook back and forth while the companion hosting the event approached. All right everyone, let's give a round of applause for Earth Force 1 for taking home the prize in this round. She approached Bihina, extending one taloned hand to her with a toothy grin. As promised, 500 points to the victor. Bihina nodded her head with a small smile, extending her hand to accept the prized handshake. Applause erupted in the room, though most of it was from the Rabbit Girl and the Spider Girl, who seemed especially excited about the turn of events. Baloo actually jumped over the stage, hopping to stand next to Bihina. So, where to next? I could teach you how to race, or maybe some treasure hunts. Bihina gave a small laugh, shaking her head before turning to look at me. Sorry, but we've got to be going home now, she answered, turning to look at Baloo again. The pair of large rabbit ears drooped down pitifully. Leaving already? Well, maybe you could invite me to your admin room so we can hang out? Her words were not directed at Bihina, but rather me. Once we get qualified to do so, sure. I answered with a brief nod, which seemed to take Baloo by surprise. Huh? You aren't actually in the games yet? Oh, no wonder. I thought you looked familiar. You were a newbie in last year's meeting. Sure. Just let me know when you qualify and I can make time to come over. Baloo nodded her head happily at the revelation. I would definitely be speaking with Grimmer about her once we got back. She didn't really seem to be so simple anymore. Chapter 181, To Spend a Fortune. I briefly debated with myself whether I should find Grimmer to talk to him before going back, or wait until I was in my own admin room. Ultimately, I decided to wait. I didn't want to have a question about whether or not Baloo was really trustworthy when anyone could just eavesdrop on it. Including the girl herself. Yes, it may be rude to talk about someone behind their back like this, but when you consider that situations like this could mean the life and death of hundreds of millions of people, maybe even billions by now. Better safe than sorry. Bihina and I gave our brief farewells to both Kathy and Baloo, who both once again expressed an interest in seeing our admin room when we could invite other people into it freely. Once we had chosen to leave, I mentally braced myself again. Yes, I might be embarrassing myself if something simple happens, but in the end I was glad that I did. This transfer method was not exactly a nice one. The floor around mine and Bihina's feet began to shift like sand, before seeming to liquefy. Our bodies lowered for just a moment, making me think we were going to fall through the floor, until I saw a trio of black fins rising up from the ground. Oh, I hate this one, Baloo said quietly, quickly jumping back away from us and pulling Kathy with her. Dale? Bihina looked at me worriedly, her eyes wide with a hint of fright. The trio of fins sank and rose above the ground as they circled us, one in front and two behind. With how they always maintained the same position, it was clear that they were part of one creature. Soon, my assumptions were confirmed, when the creature rose enough that a section of its smooth black back was exposed. Wide and smooth like rubber, a wet sheen causing the light to reflect off of it. By now, some of the other keepers were looking our way. Some had looks of pity, others fear, and still more curious. I felt a hand in mine, and looked over to see Bihina gripping it. The land shark, for that was the only thing I could call it, was starting to move further away. Or, to be more accurate, it was lining up to attack. Our feet were stuck in the ground, unable to move now that we had decided to leave, and the animation was in effect. When we saw the trio of fins turning towards us, we knew it was almost over. However, What we weren't prepared for was the sheer size of the creature's body. From snout to tail, the shark was 20 meters long and 5 wide. Its mouth, when it opened it, did not contain endless rows of teeth. Instead, there was a swirling black mass that seemed to suck everything in. As it approached, the creature leapt out of the floor, rising up enough that its giant jaws completely engulfed mine and Bihina's bodies. I closed my eyes tight, clenching my fists as I heard Bihina let out a screech. My entire body seemed to tighten as it was pulled towards the black mass in the center of the shark. Twisting, snapping, breaking, my body screamed out at me in pain as I was broken down further and further. I could faintly hear the whimpered cry of Bihina beside me, before everything seemed to happen in reverse. Suddenly, I felt myself being pushed away from the previous suction force, my body warping back to normal until I crashed into something hard. From behind my eyelids, I could see a faint light. My hand was still holding onto Bihina's, but I found something else. A viscous liquid covering the entirety of my body, dripping off in large globs and falling to the floor with a splat. Bihina let out a brief whimper from next to me after a long moment, but soon we heard another familiar voice. "Oh my God, Dale!" Oravi shouted from somewhere off to the side. "What are you covered in?" "Don't know, don't care, not a fan," I muttered out, my own voice sounding distorted to me. I brought my free hand up to my face to wipe at my eyes, uncovering them enough to open. Did anyone see what happened? Finally, I saw Oravi standing next to me. We seemed to be in the hallway outside my bedroom, and she was the only one in sight. "I don't think so," she answered with a shake of her head. "I just heard a large crash and came to check it out." Is Bihina okay?" "I'm fine," Bihina herself answered, speaking so quickly that it sounded like one word. Just let me clean up." Her voice was still shaking, and it was clear that fine was very far from what she was. However, I knew that she would be able to get past that. Her words reminded me of something important. Closing my eyes again, I focused on cleaning myself, removing all the sickly green gunk covering mine and Bihina's bodies. What I could only assume was the gastric fluids of the shark after it vomited us back up. I hate that one. I found myself agreeing easily with Baloo's opinion of this transport method. Once the gunk had been removed from Bihina's body, she seemed to visibly relax, her body sagging against the wall. "Agreed, I promise not to make fun of you next time a door appears," she said weakly, turning her head to look at Oravi. When Oravi saw Bihina stretch out her 2 arms, a knowing smile gradually appeared on her face. She walked around me so that she was in front of Bihina, and then crouched down to sit in the human goddess's lap. There, Oravi spoke in a teasing tone. "Talk later. Need healing now," Bihina scolded softly, shaking her head as she wrapped her arms around Oravi, simply choosing to hug her. I raised a curious eyebrow at the sight, before shaking my head with a light laugh. Releasing Bihina's hand, I moved over towards my room, since we had appeared directly next to the door. Before entering, I glanced down to the 2 of them. "I'll be back once I check on things and see what we can get with our budget." Oravi giggled, turning her head to nod at me from within Bihina's embrace on the floor. Once I was in the room, I found that Tara wasn't present. Likely, she was with one of the others. Otherwise, she would have probably come to check out what happened when we got spit up as well. Shaking my head and shivering at the memory, I moved over towards my computer. It had been over a day since the announcement at the Keeper meeting about the card magic, and people even had the chance to see it in action at the tournament. So now, hopefully I would be able to earn some more royalties. Thankfully, I saw that a total of 216 people had bought the card law system since I last checked. And out of them, 116 bought card magic. In total, that was just over 4,500 points of royalties. Since I had paused the world before leaving, there obviously wasn't any technology advancement, but I was still able to receive a couple hundred points since the last time I collected. This brought my grand total, counting what we earned in the meeting, to just shy of 15,000. Thank whatever almighty power is out there for free advertisement, I muttered to myself, knowing that the Gilded Branch's advertisement likely drew in a large portion of those customers to purchase my system. Once again, I ran some quick math in my head to determine what we needed. Just to get the gates set up, we needed tier 3 of all of our energies aside from divine. That meant we had to purchase 4 tier 3 information globes. Add on the need for the 3 tier 2 ones for ki, spiritual energy, and natural energy, and the price came to 9,000 even. I had also promised to get Udona the next tier of monsters and cards when the gates opened, so that is another 1850 points. Finally, I needed to buy the other systems for both Deccan and Desbar, so that they could be fully integrated with Earth. That was going to be the difficult part. Going back through the list of systems that I had purchased for Earth, and adding their costs in for each of the new worlds, the grand total price came to just under 13,000. This price was enough to make me start to sweat, but I had pulled up a calculator on the computer to double-check my math. Okay, first things first, I muttered to myself, sending a message to Ryan. We're back now, and we have all the points we need. I'm going to go ahead and buy the information, that way you and Tubrick can work on the gates. That shouldn't boost our world power any, since it's not something in our world. Welcome back, and understood. I'll be by shortly to collect them so we can get started. I take it Bihena performed admirably? She seemed to have a hint of expectation in her voice when she asked that. Right now she's a nervous wreck receiving healing from Orivi in the hall. But while we were there, yes, she was fine. I decided to tease Bihena indirectly by only telling half the truth. Though, I'm sure that will come back to bite me later. Ryan didn't reply for a long moment, as if stunned by the message I had sent. Eventually, however, I heard her voice in my mind again. Wow, that must have really been something. Anyways, standard rules of no teaching the mortals what mortal are meant to learn for themselves. For now, at least. I confirmed with a nod. Once the gates were in place, I was going to enter a rather serious training phase while the world adjusted to everything that was being added. If they haven't learned enough when it's getting closer to time, we can have everyone teach them for a couple hundred years or so to make sure that they are ready. After fighting in the tournament, I was actually fairly confident of my chances in the Keeper games, at least for the first tier. Just looking at the level of power that a first-tier Keeper had let me compare myself with what was expected. While I may not be a match for them presently, that was bound to change as soon as I lifted the level limit of the world, and trained my world's skills. Without wasting any more time, I purchased the tiers of knowledge for the 4 energies. I held off on buying the 3rd tier of monsters and magic for Udona's world for now, since I wanted to wait until the gates were actually done for that. I saw myself how powerful the cards could be when unleashed, and didn't want to take the risk that flooding Udona's world with them would push me into the games even earlier than expected. Finally, I fired off a message through the system. I hadn't forgotten about my interest in learning more about the adorable acting Starkiller. I had just been delayed due to getting things ready, so I spoke to Alcahest while the information globes began to form in front of me, turning into 7 balls of shining blue light. Earth Force 1, you free for a moment? Alcahest, you went back already? Sure, what do you need? Earth Force 1, one of my companions became friendly with another Keeper. And I want to make sure that they don't have a bad reputation or anything, before I consider inviting them to my admin room later. Alcahest, alright, I guess that sounds fair enough. Remember, we're information brokers, Dale. If you want detailed info on something, it'll cost you. Though, what we can provide is typically limited. If it's just which side of the line they're on, I can probably hand that out for free. I tensed up slightly when Alcahest mentioned the possibility of a fee. I was experiencing firsthand the scale of points that experienced Keepers dealt with, so I could only imagine how much the personal information of an older Keeper would cost. Thankfully, a simple, "Can they be trusted?" was a free service, or I might not be able to afford it at all. Earth Force 1, the Keeper's title is Starkiller. Alcahest, oh, you met Baloo? Yeah, you have nothing to worry about. She's actually one of ours, in the guild. Part of that Avenger branch I told you about. As long as you're not one of the bloodthirsty types. She's totally harmless. That's all I can say for free, though. Sure you understand? I sent a quick message saying that I did. It was surprising to learn that Baloo was a member of the Gilded branch, but less so once I found out she was in the Avenger branch. The way that she spoke about the living spell, it was obvious that she had seen struggles at that level repeatedly. And if she developed her own profound laws for her world, that meant that she has been in the business for a long time. Earth Force 1, I'm a bit strapped for points, so not sure if I can afford the answer to this, but I'm honestly just curious. Has she been around since before the titles were handed out? Starkiller just doesn't really seem to fit her at all. There was a pause as Alcahest seemed to be considering whether or not to respond to me. However, a few minutes later, I received a message back. Alcahest, nah, that was her predecessor. She came in a few years later. Like so many other unfortunate souls, she inherited a title completely contradictory to her character. I couldn't help but chuckle as I read that, thinking back to Miss Terry in the tournament. It was obvious that the one who made that name should have been a woman, and he had inherited the title as well. Though, that made me think about how long it must have been since the titles became a thing. After all, Miss Terry had become powerful enough through their own training to create the technique that destroyed me in the tournament. Tara had once told me that it was 2 generations of keepers ago when the names appeared. However, if I recall right, that should have been the keeper that had a space-age tech-themed Earth. There was no telling how long he was around before he died, so that was a long time span to work with. Of course, it's not like it mattered all that much, just my idle curiosity. Chapter 182, Planning Ahead to Keep My Head. As I pulled myself from my thoughts, I heard the soft melodic laugh of Ryan as she entered the room. Through the doorway, I could still see Bihena receiving her healing from a rather helpless-looking Orivi. So, are these the orbs? She asked with a smile of amusement, looking towards the 7 balls of blue light on my desk. That's right, you mentioned before that Tara had been teaching you how to make these, so do you think that you could make copies of them before you go? I fully intended to train myself in the use of the different energies, just as I had the first tiers of natural energy and ki so long ago. Not right now. Ryan answered with a shake of her head, shrugging her shoulders and spreading her hands out. I've got to study them myself first. But, tell you what. Give me a day, and I should have enough time by then to copy them over. Otherwise, I'll probably end up accidentally skipping large amounts of information, and none of it will make sense. I gave a nod of understanding at that, and waved my hand to send the 7 balls of light towards her. All right, do you want me to send Leowin with you? The demi-goddess soul was still sitting in my spirit realm. She had been shocked by the transport method we had gone through before, but seemed to just be waiting for the right moment to come out now that we were back. Ryan put on a bitter smile, even though Leowin perked up at the question. Sorry, not this time. If I'm going to get these all copied down within a day, then I need to be able to concentrate. Sorry dear, she said as she looked to me, but I could tell that she was really speaking with Leowin. I'll drag you along to play once I've made the copies for him. Leowin's mood briefly dropped when she was rejected, though I could feel her nodding her head. She said that'll be fine. I interpreted for her. In the meantime, maybe she'd like to play with Orvi? Leowin glanced up again at that, and I could feel her attention drawn towards the hallway. At the same time, Orvi seemed to notice that her name was mentioned, and turned to look into the room with a hopeful expression. Seeing that, Leowin laughed, and the familiar gray mist burst from my body, quickly reforming into the elven girl who rushed towards the door. Bihena briefly pouted when Leowin rescued Orvi from her, and then got up with a sigh, moving to enter the room just as Ryan was leaving it. I take it that means you want me for something? She asked, leaning against the doorframe. Well, first I wanted to say thanks. The points you earned really helped us get what we needed. I turned in my chair to look at her, leaning back slightly while cracking my neck to stretch. Also, I spoke with Alcahest. Starkiller's good to enter as soon as we're qualified and everything is set. Bihena looked surprised at that, her eyes opening wide for a brief moment. Thought she was hiding something. Good to know. And yeah, I'd like that. She seems like a good kid. However, I quickly continued. Another thing, when you were playing that game with her, I saw you selected a party system. Tell me a bit about that, and why you chose it. Given that it's you we're talking about, you had to have had your reasons. A small chuckle escaped Bihena's lips, and she waved a hand. In front of me, a blue window appeared, showing the information of the system I had asked about. Party system allows the inhabitants of the world to form parties. The size limit of a party, as well as the method to establish one, is set by the purchasing keeper. When 2 people are in a party, they have a general idea of their party members' health and location. Game system required. 125 points. It's something I saw in the Keeper's Cards tournament. On the surface, it doesn't appear like it provides a great benefit. There is no sharing of experience gained from killing a monster, no long-distance communication, just a simple, general idea of health and location. That's all that the system offered. Bihena answered with a shrug. Before I could ask anything else, she continued her explanation. But then I noticed something. After applying that system, the combat levels of my troops grew stronger. My culture levels began increasing, and even my counter abilities were increased faster than normal. It wasn't until after I was eliminated that I took the time to think it over. With the party system, adventuring groups would appear and band together, able to work more fluidly as a team when they could sense each other's presence and condition. Healers became more efficient, coordination improved, and people grew stronger with less loss of life. Just think of this from a different standpoint. You create a party with a diplomatic spy before sending them into enemy territory. At any point, you know if that spy has been executed or tortured, or if they have been sent somewhere else. You send a scout into a dungeon, and you don't hear from him for a worrying amount of time. Rather than advance foolishly, you already know whether he is in danger, or if you should continue to wait. As she explained, I couldn't help but nod my head, agreeing with her. That definitely sounds like it would be a good long-term benefit. If we can afford it after everything else we need, it will probably be a good idea to look into. Bihena gave a satisfied nod when she heard my answer. Then, is there anything else? No, that's all I needed for now, I told her, shaking my head to dismiss her. While she left, I closed my eyes and sent another mental message off, this time to 2 goddesses. Ashley, Udona, how are your worlds coming along? Do you think you'll be ready for the gates soon? Dale, I was wanting to talk to you when you got back. I made some new discoveries that could enhance the card magic. Udona's hasty reply came back almost immediately. If you mean about the later tier fusion cards, I already found out at the meeting. Oh, I could practically feel the Kitsune girl sulking when she heard that I had already learned what she wanted to report to me. Then, yeah, Deccan should be good to go anytime. They're just now starting to learn how to extract specific cards, so they're at a good level for joining up with the others. Desbar is fine as well, Ashley reported in once Udona had finished. They have established their worldwide internet, so technology is beginning to boom at an unprecedented rate, similar to what happened on Old Earth. I gave a relieved sigh at that. All right, then we'll keep the 3 worlds paused for now. When the gates are created and installed, we'll start fast-forwarding again to let them develop and explore. If we put the gate on Earth somewhere remote, that will put Deccan and Desbar as the 2 that encounter each other first, and give them time to sort whatever they need to sort out. Why put the gate somewhere remote? Won't that mean it's in monster territory? Udona asked in a confused tone. Thankfully, Ashley came in with the answer quickly. We can't have it in any race's territory on Earth, or they will claim ownership of it. More importantly, Deccan and Desbar don't have the game system yet. They're all essentially level 1, so any random person could just go through the gate and either destroy or enslave both worlds. Putting it in neutral territory increases the risk levels against monsters, but it allows both worlds to build themselves to an equal footing with Earth before that gate is discovered. Udona made a sound of understanding, seeming to accept that logic. Udona, one last thing. I'm going to hold off on buying the 3rd-tier cards and monsters for Deccan until the gates are installed. It won't make much difference since the world is frozen, but I don't want to take the risk that the 3rd tier pushes Deccan over the limit and sends us to the games before we're ready. That's fine, Udona answered quickly. The world is going to be paused until then anyways, so it won't make much difference. Besides, a single mage can't even properly use a 2nd-tier spell right now. It takes a team of 5 just to cast one. I can't imagine how many it would take to do a 3rd-tier spell before their mana levels increase. With that taken care of, I sent out 2 more calls. Calliope, Acalia, would the 2 of you mind meeting me in my room? Hey Dale, Acalia called out excitedly from the doorway just seconds after I asked for her presence, when I know she wasn't standing there before. Guess she was bored. You need me for something? Before I could answer, the large bear of a woman walked up behind her, patting Acalia on the head between her canine ears. Out of the way, Pipsqueak, she said in an amused tone. Boss wanted both of us. Acalia stuck her tongue out playfully while making room for Calliope to enter. First things first, Acalia, as the goddess of the hunt, what types of combat have you taken as your specialty? I already knew that Calliope loved martial arts, so I figured I should ask Acalia. The lichen goddess tilted her head in thought at that. Archery and magic. Those are the two main fields I usually specialize in. I like to attack from a distance. I've also combined archery with the various different energies to test their results, and started the arcane archery legacy with the humans. Of course, I know how to defend myself in close combat, but I'm not as good as muscles for brains. Calliope rubbed her fist against the crown of Acalia's head while she laughed, causing the girl to squirm beneath her. I felt a sigh building up as she gave the answer I was expecting, but held it down for now. Good, that's what I was hoping. I already bought the tiers of energy that we need to make the gates. Once Ryan gets them back to me, I plan to study them. After that, I want the two of you to be my combat partners. Ooh, another spar like the last time? Calliope asked with some excitement, while Acalia simply looked at us curiously. Sort of. I found a game while I was at the meeting that lets you build yourself to a specific level of power and fight an opponent in a deathmatch. To help me train for the games, I want the both of you to join me for that. There's more to training than just battling. Acalia pointed out quickly towards my statement, drawing a laugh from Calliope. I know, and I don't plan to fight constantly. I'll be doing my own training, but whenever I improve, I want to test myself against you. It'll help me get real combat training, and maybe even pick up some of the skills you two use. Hearing that, Calliope gave a nod. It's fine, Aki. He did this once before with me. There's nothing to worry about. Acalia had a hard-to-read expression on her face, but finally relented with a small nod. All right, I'll help you train, Dale. Finally, that sigh I had been holding back escaped me, and I smiled towards the two of them. Thanks. I had a taste of real keeper combat at the meeting. And while I might be able to hold my own against an invasion, that's only if they don't do anything unexpected. Just in case, I need to make sure that I'm ready. Both goddesses gave a nod of understanding at that. With their support, my confidence towards being ready for the invasion increased drastically.